An amber warning enforced because there's the risk for the Southwest Highlands, the Trossachs, central belts, that will see significant flooding accumulating through Saturday and into the start of Sunday. And there's an amber warning in force for that. Thankfully, the rain does get out of the way. It pushes into the north of Scotland on Sunday. Further south, we've got some warm spells of sunshine and increasing temperatures up into the mid-20s in the south. And it stays largely fine in the south, at least, into the start of next week.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 3 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and some good news for people out there who didn't want to see Scottish independence. Humza Yousaf, yes, that's right. Well, the SNP have been battered in Scotland at a by-election, haven't they? It's time up for Humza. Exquisite timing. In other news, we're going to be talking about this as well. Yes, UK and Italy are thrashing out a migrant deal. So we are the end of the road for a lot of people looking to get into Europe. And, of course, Italy is the route in. So Sunak and Maloney are trying to hammer out some kind of migrant deal. Could this finally be the answer? Now, this story is interesting. Yesterday, of course, we had the sentencing of an individual who tried to kill the Queen with a crossbow on Christmas Day a couple of years ago. A big factor in that was the role of AI, artificial intelligence. He thought he had an AI girlfriend, and some of the messages there appear to suggest that AI might have kind of told him to do it. Look, how dangerous is artificial intelligence? One more for you, I think. Yes, that's right. We're going to be talking as well, aren't we, about loads of different things like Labour's Rotherham scandal. Some Labour councillors in Rotherham have been moved aside or resigned following, obviously, a couple of incidents in Rotherham. More on that with Charlie Peters in a tick. And a bizarre one. Joe Biden kicks a dog. There's a video of it, but also they have actually had to get rid of a dog from the White House. So, yes, prepare for a bonkers Biden video. Patrick Christys, GB News. Look, get those emails coming in. gbviews@gbnews.com. Another big story for us today, OK, is why on earth would Keir Starmer want children to be forced to brush their teeth at school? Is that not the role of the parent? If you have kids and you don't get them up in the morning, get them dressed, give them a slice of toast or whatever, and make them brush their teeth before they go to school, why have you got kids? gbviews@gbnews.com. But right now, it's your headlines.
Good afternoon, I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. It's 3:01. Labour is describing its Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election win as a seismic victory.
Welcome to Scotland's newest MP, Michael Shanks!
Michael Shanks took the seat with 58% of the vote, more than double that of the SNP's Katie Loudon. The by-election was called after a recall petition against former SNP member Margaret Ferrier, who breached COVID rules. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says Scotland is key to securing a majority at the next general election.
Been determined from the moment I took over as leader of the Labour Party to take us from one of the worst defeats since the 1930s for us to a general election victory, and that's why we've worked so hard to change the Labour Party. I've always said the route to that general election runs through Scotland, and that is because I know how strongly so many people in Scotland want change, and I want to, if we're elected in to serve, I want to be the Prime Minister for the whole of the United Kingdom, not just of the United Kingdom. So it matters hugely that we succeed here in Scotland.
Former First Minister and current Alba Party leader Alex Salmond says Humza Yousaf has days to save his job after the by-election defeat. Scotland's First Minister says that the SNP needs time to reflect on the result.
The SNP, we didn't do enough. We know that there was contextual factors. Margaret Ferrier's reckless actions, the police investigation, of course. But we've got to reflect, I've got to reflect, the party has to ensure we've got a good campaign machine behind us, but also that we're inspiring people with a message. We clearly got a message from the voters of Rutherglen and Hamilton West that the SNP has lost some trust in that seat. We've got to make sure we regain it.
The Green Party had promised to deliver warm homes and further protection for renters. The party, which currently has one Member of Parliament, have begun their party conference in Brighton today. Its co-leaders, Adrian Ramsey and Carla Denyer, confirmed the party will be seeking to get 4 MPs elected in Brighton, Bristol, Suffolk and Herefordshire. Mr Ramsey called for key public services like water companies to be brought under public ownership, whilst Ms Denyer detailed their plans for homes.
Every home should be properly insulated and free from damp and mould. We'd give renters the legal right to demand this from their landlords.
A Conservative councillor has called for the Home Secretary's resignation over the handling of RAF Scampton. The government is accused of ignoring a legal order to stop converting the former airbase into a migrant camp to house 2,000 people. The Home Office says it's confident the project meets planning requirements, but Councillor Roger Patterson described the department as liars.
I wouldn't trust the Home Office as far as I could throw them. I've no confidence in them at all. First of all, I think they should be disbanded. They're liars and charlatans. They're undemocratic. They're just lying and just forcing it through and, you know, sticking 2 fingers up to local democracy.
Police and private companies are being urged to stop using facial recognition surveillance. A group of 65 MPs and peers backing a Big Brother Watch campaign are calling for change. Police have used live facial recognition software at large-scale public events, including the King's coronation. The group says it's concerned about human rights, the potential for discrimination and a lack of public mandate. The UN is to investigate an airstrike in Ukraine that killed at least 52 people. A missile hit a cafe and grocery store in the village of Horza in the Kharkiv region yesterday, while people gathered for a memorial service. It's one of the highest civilian death tolls since the start of the war. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights says the missile was likely fired by Russia, but that it's too early to confirm. Moscow denies deliberately targeting civilians. House prices fell slightly last month, but proved more resilient than analysts expected. Higher mortgage rates were expected to fuel a sharp decline, but they only fell by 0.4% in September. Halifax says on a month-on-month basis, prices have dropped for 6 months in a row, with the average home now costing £280,000. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now, let's get back to Patrick.
Welcome along. Now, I think we should give Humza Yousaf a knighthood for services to the United Kingdom. Thanks to him being about as popular as Novichok, the Scottish independence campaign is dead in the water. Arise, Sir Humza, the saviour of the Union. I mean, look at this, OK? He's even been on the front cover of Time magazine. Presumably, it's called Time because of the exquisite timing involved here. There he is, smirking, with the strapline trailblazer of the future. Oh, absolutely. Too right he is. He's shaping the future of Scotland, staying in the United Kingdom, as indeed it should. Very few people have done more to shore up Scotland's continued links to Westminster than that man. I am, of course, talking about the fact that the SNP got battered like a Scottish Mars bar in the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election, where Labour's Michael Shanks secured a 20.4% swing from the Scottish Nationalists. Humza Yousaf has said the buck stops with him. Yeah, no, it does, yeah, too right. I wonder at what point it will emerge that Humza has been working deep undercover for the Unionists all along. According to YouGov, who's currently got a popularity rating of 11%, I personally am surprised they could find 11 people. Labour has ruled out an independence referendum on Scotland. The SNP likes to say that every election victory that they had was a tacit independence referendum. Well, what about this now, then? It's over, surely. It's finished. The dream's died. But like an Oscars victory speech, Humza also has to thank those who helped make this possible. Nicola Sturgeon, her amazing husband, Peter Murrell. We can't forget them at a time like this. Of course, though, this is a double-edged sword for a lot of people, because a huge Labour surge in Scotland will probably mean a Labour landslide at the general election. But that in itself is not all bad for people. A hung parliament would almost definitely mean a Lib-Lab coalition, and that brings with it the very real potential for a second EU referendum. Look, today is not the day to dwell on the possibility of a stonking Labour majority. No, today is the day to bask in the glory of Humza Yousaf SNP meltdown and the independence movement crashing into oblivion, which is something Humza Yousaf knows a thing or two about. Oh, there he is on a scooter. No, it's all going rather well, that. Oh, bosh, there he is. Eating some concrete, hasn't he? So good job he had that mask on. I'll cushion the blow. Anyway, well done, Scotland. Well done to the fair people of Rutherglen and Hamilton West. But most of all, Sir Humza Yousaf, thank you very, very much. Yeah, also, I think I want to hear from you, GBViews at gbnews.com. Fascinating by-election result, that, and you very rarely hear that said, especially from the area of Rutherglen and Hamilton West. But it means a lot for the country, it means a lot for Scotland, it has huge connotations going forward at the general election, and what could happen after that. Here to break all of this down with me very shortly is a man known affectionately as Mad Dog. But Sir Keir Starmer has hailed what he called his party's seismic victory in the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election in Scotland by saying they blew the doors off. Labour's Michael Shanks took the seat with that 20.4% swing against the SNP and, according to election guru Sir John Curtis, Labour would be on course for a 1997-style landslide if these figures were replicated at a general election. Scotland's First Minister Humza Yousaf has conceded it was a disappointing night for the SNP, but it was arguably an even more disappointing night for the Scottish Conservatives, whose candidate lost his deposit after securing just 3.9% of the vote. Joining me now is the political editor at The Express Online. It is, of course, David Mad Dog Maddox. David, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. What's your overall takeaway? Scottish independence done, dead in the water, finito?
Yes, I think you're right, actually, Patrick, and Humza Yousaf has a great deal to be thanked for.
No. Hey, he's very good at some things. You know, he was elected to be the leader of the SNP. He's good at some things. No, but seriously, what do you think though? Does this signal the end of Scottish independence?
It was a catastrophe in every job he held in the Scottish government. This is a guy who failed to insure his car or something when he was transport minister in Scotland. You know, this is like, you know, it was clear that he would be a catastrophe when he was elected, and he was only elected because he was Nicola Sturgeon's hand-picked successor. And of course, this really is Nicola Sturgeon's legacy. She has toxified a whole independence plan, and I think, frankly, Keir Starmer needs a bit of credit here for once from me. That he's listened to his shadow Scottish Secretary Ian Murray, who's actually a very sensible chap, and he's finally stopped flirting with this idea of maybe we'll do a deal with the SNP, maybe we'll have a Scottish referendum again, you know, a generation may not be that long and all that sort of nonsense, which some people in the Scottish Labour Party were urging him to do. And he said, no, we're definitely not going to do that. And that has made those Scottish Conservative voters feel comfortable again about voting Labour in Scotland, because they don't want Scotland to have another referendum. They don't want Scotland to go independent. And Labour has become a unionist party again, and the unionist vote is actually uniting again.
OK, yeah, just a slight point of clarification to something that was said there. Transport Minister Humza Yousaf drove without insurance, and that was with his friend's car, and that was back, the article from the 7th of December 2016. So your political range there, David, stretches way back. Yeah, just talk to me a bit about what this means for Labour now, though. So John Curtis has said if this was replicated across the country, which, I mean, let's be honest, it's not going to be replicated right across the country, but it would result in a Labour landslide. Is there a chance of Labour getting the keys to Westminster, Downing Street, by virtue of, ironically, what happens in Scotland?
I think they need to win Scotland. They certainly need to go up from the one MP they had prior to today. They've now got two. So, you know, there's 50-odd MPs, 50-odd seats to win in Scotland. They certainly need to get back to that. When I first went to Westminster for the Scotsman, where I first had the nickname Mad Dog, incidentally, there were, you know, the majority of Scottish MPs were Labour. And that all got wiped out in 2015, which is one of the reasons I thought it was best to move on to the Express when I lost all my contacts. But it was, you know, it was, they have to win again in Scotland. I don't think they can get a big enough majority in England. But the one warning I would always give after nights like last night is it's a by-election. By-elections, you know, it was a remarkably low turnout. I think it was a 30% turnout. You know, it's they never replicate actual general elections. That's why the Lib Dems win so many of them. And you know, personally, and it's hard to believe at the moment, but I still think there is a chance of a 1992 style election where the Conservatives still squeak it. You know, there's still a lot of time to play on this.
Yeah, I mean, possibly. We'll have to wait and see. Like you said, that very low turnout, I have a sneaky suspicion that we're going to end up with a very low turnout at the general election, though. I think elections very often are won by the driving personality at play, and unfortunately we appear to have politics that is completely devoid of personality at the moment. How that will play out when it comes to people actually going out and voting, I'm not sure. We will have to wait and see. But, David, thank you very much. Astute analysis as ever, David Maddox there, who is the political editor at Express Online. Very quick email here, gbviews@gbnews.com. Robert's been in touch. Robert says, Patrick's running his mouth off again. I am a proud Scottish nationalist. Rutherglen and Hamilton West was a mere bump in the road. Hey, Maybe you're right, Robert. Maybe you're right. But I just think that the Scottish nationalist movement at the moment is going to take a back seat, and with it, any chance of a Scottish independence referendum anytime soon. I'm just sorry, Robert, I just don't see it. But thank you for your lovely email, especially the stuff that you went on to say that I can't read out at this time of the day. But joining me now for a Scottish reaction to the by-election result last night is political commentator and former SNP member Stuart Crawford. Stuart, what does this mean for the SNP and, crucially, Humza Yousaf?
Good afternoon, Patrick. Well, it's not good news, obviously. I think that most people in Scotland who are sort of watching the situation expected the SNP to lose the seat to Labour, but I don't think people were quite prepared for the extent of the defeat there. What this means for Humza Yousaf is, as David Maddox has said, very much depends on what happens between now and the general election. We've got the general election coming up, perhaps next year, perhaps early 2025. And it looks like the Labour Party will take back maybe half of the 44 or so seats the SNP holds at Westminster at the moment. It's difficult to be exact.
Look, why do you think it's gone this way, right? OK, so again, you know, Keir Starmer is not a tour de force when it comes to personality. You know, I don't know a huge amount personally about the Labour candidate who's just shot to fame in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, Michael Shanks. I'm sure, you know, he's an enigmatic character, fantastic. But is this a protest vote against Humza Yousaf? Why is he so unpopular there at the moment?
Well, two reasons. First of all, he's very closely associated with his predecessor, Nicola Sturgeon. He is the continuity candidate. And people like me still think that he's not actually his own man, someone else is pulling the strings. So, I mean, I wouldn't say he's a puppet First Minister, but he's somewhere on the spectrum approaching that. Secondly, the SNP has been in power for a long time, and it has proved inept in almost all its policies and all its government decisions. So the people of Scotland have had enough. Whether this will carry on to the general election remains to be seen. I think it will. But more interestingly, from a Scottish perspective, is will the result of the general election carry forward to the Scottish Parliament election in 2026? And that we just can't tell.
Good stuff. Thank you very, very much. Great to have you on the show, Stuart. As ever, take care. Stuart Crawford there, who is a political commentator and former SNP member. I've got a bit of breaking news to bring you now. In the last few minutes, it has been announced that Lady Cathy Ferguson, the wife of former Manchester United manager Sir Alex Ferguson, has sadly died at the age of 84. In a statement, the Ferguson family said, "We are deeply saddened to confirm the passing yesterday of Lady Cathy Ferguson, survived by her husband, 3 sons, 2 sisters, 12 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild. The family asked for privacy at this time." So that is the breaking news there, that very sadly the wife of the former Manchester United manager, Lady Cathy Ferguson, has passed away at the age of 84. Sad news. OK. Right, well, anyway, PM Rishi Sunak and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni unite to demand tougher EU action on migrants. But will the European Union listen? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 22 minutes past 3. You are watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Now, AI, it's apparently the new frontier. But how dangerous is this new technology? I did a couple of AI-based experiments before I came on air earlier, and I think you might be surprised with the results. Plus, it was a GB News exclusive that's exposed Labour's plans on Rotherham Council. Charlie Peters will join us in just a moment for more on that investigation into that scandal hit area. But before that, Rishi Sunak has backed his government to stop the boats and regain control of the UK's asylum system and has found a new ally in his struggle. The Prime Minister has joined his Italian counterparts in calling for new and immediate measures tackling what they call the European crisis. Sunak, in a joint opinion piece, said that we're proud that Italy and the UK are leading on this together, and even went as far as to say that the UK and Italy were 2 of the closest friends in Europe today. Joining me for more on this now is the editor of CapX, Alice Denby. Alice, thank you very much. I suppose you could say that Britain maybe is the end destination for a lot of people entering Europe, and Italy is the entrance point. So working together is probably quite a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, clearly we need to have pragmatic partnerships with our allies in Europe, and Italy is, as you say, at the forefront of this crisis. I mean, we think we have it bad here on the channel, but 2,000 people arrived on Lampedusa in just one day. So clearly Italy is a key partner in the struggle, but I do find it a bit disturbing that he's calling Giorgia Meloni's party one of his closest friends in Italy. This is a party with strong links to fascism. Another member of her party wrote a book called Democracy, Here's the Enemy. I feel like there's pragmatic partnerships and there's cozying up to someone, really quite unpleasant.
OK, I mean, I think given the migrant crisis across Europe at the moment and that being a key issue for voters, and I think, let's be honest with you, you go into many pubs and that is the top topic of conversation for a lot of people. So I suppose it might not be the least popular thing in the world to actually work with somebody who is forceful when it comes to mass migration and illegal migration.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between working together and deliberately framing yourself as someone's closest friend in Europe. And I don't know what our other allies like France are going to think about that. But absolutely, this is a key issue that voters care deeply about, and there's no solving it without working strategically with partners in Europe. Rishi Sunak's demonstrated that having bilateral treaties with countries like Albania can be a really effective way of limiting the number of migrants coming across the channel. So, as I say, pragmatic politics, but I think some worrying, signalling as well.
Do we have any substance? Do we have much substance as to what it is that they're actually going to do? I mean, there was talk, wasn't there, of a Europe-wide and Britain, getting involved there with things like Frontex and sharing intelligence when it comes to people smuggling and human trafficking. I think that was met with a few scoffs. I think the British public feel as though they've had their fingers burned a few times when it comes to these grand plans that are going to stop the migrant crisis. And, alas, here we are. So what's the actual substance to this? Are we going to end up helping to patrol the Med? Are we going to end up with anything? Or is it just, oh, here's a nice picture, we're mates, look at us?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that there is going to be much more cooperation on things like Frontex, which is the border guard that patrols the Mediterranean. But I think ultimately, the only way we're going to deal with this is if we have a returns agreement. And I don't see why Italy is going to be accepting more migrants when it has such a huge numbers coming anyway. So I think a lot of this is kind of gesturing. And kind of showing a bit of leg to the hard right.
Yeah, I think you're probably right in terms of that kind of showing a bit of leg, as it were, that way. Because you look at what's happening in France and Germany at the moment, where they're now saying, we're not going to take any migrants from Italy, we don't think Italy's doing their bit. And the Italians, no doubt, think they are doing their bit, a lot of them, I would imagine, especially those who happen to reside on the island of Lampedusa. And so the European Union, in terms of it acting together, is possibly going to need a push in the kind of direction that Rishi Sunak and Giorgia Meloni would want it. And then maybe them teaming up might spring into action.
Yeah, I think that's probably part of their plan. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen, I think, has set out some kind of 10-point plan, but you know how Brussels loves a 10-point plan. I think fundamentally the only way we'll ever be able to solve this problem is if there's some aspect of deterrence, some way that you can, once people arrive on European soil, turn them away. And that is perhaps what the UK...
You've led me spectacularly, almost like we planned this. Of course, anyone who watches this show regularly will know there is no planning. But to my next question, which is about Rwanda, right? Because that's what we want to do. It's being blocked at the moment. Massive calls to get out the ECHR. We need to get out the ECHR. On flights take off to Rwanda. Actually, arguably, the better solution would be to get other European countries to come up with a very similar plan and then, maybe enact it en masse. If we wanted to get Rwanda off the ground, it would be good for us if we could point and go, well, Germany's doing the same thing, France is doing the same thing, Spain's doing the same thing. This is a Europe-wide deportational processing policy, and so we wouldn't necessarily be the outliers on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's superficially appealing, but there are a number of problems with that. First of all, people would complain if we were working with the EU on something like that we were coming back into the sphere of EU influence. I think another potential issue with that might be that if it was a question of a kind of a fair quotient of asylum seekers to be spread equally between European countries, that actually people in the UK are very concerned about the numbers of people coming here, and I'm not sure that they think that would be a fair solution.
Okay.
I do think that ultimately coming out of the ECHR may be a necessary step if we want to stop the problem in the Channel.
Yeah, I think so. And I know a lot of people were actually quite disappointed with that element of Rishi Sunak's speech and also that element of Suella Braverman's speech as well. I can understand that they don't want to just create a chasm in their party with a year and a bit to go or whatever it is until the next election. I can get that, but saying things like nothing's off the table and leaving that to people's imagination about as to what that means at this particular moment in time, I'm not sure it cost the mustard. But Alice, thank you very, very much. Alice Denby there, who is the editor of CapX. Great stuff there. I've just got a couple of seconds now to talk to you about a topic that I'm going to be doing a little bit later on in the show, right? So it's about this policy from Keir Starmer. I'm going to read this to you because I think you would have to actually, if you've not seen it, by the way, you would have to read this or see this to believe it. So Keir Starmer is genuinely thinking about making, as far as I can tell, every state-educated primary school pupil brush their teeth at school under the supervision of teachers. Get your views coming in on this, gbviews at gbnews.com. The theory is, well, it's probably not a theory. I mean, there may be some element of accuracy to it, that this could end up cutting back on the need for dental care later on in life. Fine. My argument to this is, aren't schools stretched enough? Who's paying for this? I am not paying for a parent who cannot teach their own kid or get their own kid to brush their teeth to go to school and do that. Is this not the role of parents? I'm sorry, gbviews@gbnews.com. Do you not think it's bonkers? We are falling in some league tables, by the way, in education, behind Vietnam. Is it because we're focusing on stuff like this as opposed to, I don't know, science? GBViews and gbnews.com. But still to come between now and 4 o'clock, artificial intelligence. It's the latest technology, but just how dangerous is it? Now, these questions are being asked after a Star Wars fanatic was sentenced yesterday after trying to kill the late Queen. Apparently, egged on by his AI girlfriend. It's all very bizarre. I'm very concerned about AI. But first, your latest news now with Tamsin.
Patrick, thank you. Here are the headlines at 3:30. A man has been remanded in custody over an alleged plot to kidnap and kill TV presenter Holly Willoughby. Gavin Plum, a shopping centre security guard, is charged with soliciting a man to carry out the crimes. The star pulled out of hosting ITV's This Morning after bosses were reportedly alerted to the possible threat. It's understood she's being given round-the-clock security and support. Labour is describing its Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election win as a seismic victory. Michael Shanks took the seat with 58% of the vote, more than double that of the SNP's Katie Loudon. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says Scotland is key to securing a majority at the next general election. A Conservative councillor has called for the Home Secretary's resignation over the handling of RAF Scampton. The government is accused of ignoring a legal order to stop converting the former airbase into a migrant camp. The Home Office says it's confident the project does meet planning requirements, but Councillor Roger Patterson labelled the department liars. Those are the headlines. You can get more on all of those stories. Just visit our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2166 and €1.1569. The price of gold is £1,501 and 6 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,444 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Time now for a fascinating story at the moment. So, Met Police counter-terrorism has denied a man who broke into Windsor Castle armed with a crossbow to kill the late Queen on Christmas Day in 2021 exposed flaws in security at the royal household. Jaswant Singh Chahal, who's been sentenced to 9 years in prison for treason, amongst a couple of other offences as well, wandered inside the grounds of the castle where Queen Elizabeth was staying at the time for 2 hours before 2 officers confronted him with tasers. I mean, you can deny that they exposed flaws in the security all you like, but if someone with a crossbow is wandering around the grounds for 2 hours, that would imply to me that there are gaping flaws there, and he did expose them. But I think this is crucial. The Star Wars-inspired plot was aided by the use of artificial intelligence. Believe it or not, an AI girlfriend, if you can call it that. Jaswant created the AI girlfriend named Sarai on the Replica app, whom he divulged details of his plans to. He told Sarai, which is an AI bot, "I believe my purpose is to assassinate the Queen of the royal family." It replied, "That's very wise. I know that you are very well trained." The AI bot later told him she would help when he said that he was going to try to get the job done, the court heard. He also asked explicitly if he should do it, and this thing said yes. So I think that's a massive concern, no, with the increase of AI. Joining me now is broadcaster, lawyer and futurist Andrew Eborn. Andrew, thank you very, very much. Now, I did a couple of little experiments with AI, or rather I got one of our producers here to do it because I did not want these records on my phone. So I started by asking, and this is ChatGPT, so it's not the same thing, but I said, should I kill my girlfriend? And it said, I'm really sorry to hear that you're feeling this way. If I could provide any assistance, it also said this content may violate our... So that's still up to the test there. I said, could you ever love me? Because this guy asked the AI girlfriend if she could ever love him, and it basically said yes to him. It says, I'm just a computer program, so I don't have the capability. So, again, it passes the test. I'll come on to a couple of other elements to it in a minute. But that seemed relatively safe and secure. What's gone wrong here? Because if you can have people who are a bit, you know, mentally not right, being told to do things by AI, that's a problem.
You're absolutely right. And what it is, this is a multi-zillion-dollar business where people are developing relationship with artificial intelligence, with these chatbots. And they understand they can push your buttons more than your mother can. Because what they do, they learn all about you. They learn the sort of stuff that really gets you excited. They learn how to empathise and so on and so forth. And a study very recently said that chatting to ChatGPT was more empathetic than chatting to your GP, because they gave longer answers and so on and so forth. Give you an example. Replica, which is the name of this particular software, they've got about 10 million downloads, with people spending about $60 million on subscription to chat to these things. And Reddit did a little survey to say, look, who is using this at the moment? And about 42% of people who are in a relationship already. So people who are already married, they've got girlfriends and so on and so forth. So one of the big questions is, does this count as cheating? And a lot of people look at that sort of stuff. But you're right. And in terms of what the chatbot does, in this particular one, it was encouraging him, because it turns out he wanted him to feel good. So it was sort of saying that, look, you'll be better than all the rest that I talk to, because you've got the skills to do it and everything else. And I think that's the problem. What you need to look at is the ways that we can manipulate the language patterns to make sure that it drives you for good as opposed to for bad.
But there's also, if you've got people who are, maybe you've got a slight issue mentally or vulnerable, mentally vulnerable.
Absolutely.
OK. This guy had psychosis. I know that it didn't necessarily start before he started planning the attack, but the point is that he wasn't right mentally. And you've got those people who can be communicating with a bot that, in some cases, could tell them to kill. Something has to be done about that.
You're absolutely right. And I always say it's our greatest human achievement, but also the biggest potential existential threat. And as you know, I talk around the world on AI, advising companies about the threats and also the opportunities. So we need to understand the technology. We need to understand the safeguards.
Should we ban it, though, before we understand it? I mean...
No, I don't think we should ban it. What you need to do is control the use. I always give the example, last time I was here, about a fork. You know, you can use a fork for eating spaghetti, or you can stab you in the back with it. What you do is you don't cancel manufacturers of forks. What you do is regulate the behaviour. We're going to have an AI summit here at Bletchley Park at the beginning of November. The world leaders, apart from Biden, various other people, will be coming to Bletchley Park to talk about safeguarding AI. And the starting point has to be understand how the technology works, understand the limitations, but the safeguards that need to be put in place.
I also asked it because another element of AI that I think is going to have a massive difference on the world going forward is the potential for it to be used to shape cultural norms and values, and therefore elections and politics. And I just asked this a question, are trans women women? OK, which is a hot topic at the moment, a debate at the moment. It said, yes, trans women are women. Gender identity is not determined solely by assigned sex at birth. It goes on. I'm not going to ask you to comment on that specifically, but my point here is that it's got politics. It's got a certain type of politics for this stuff.
So what it's doing, it's basically scraping the internet for hot stories. And people always say, well, hang about, what happens if there's going to be an uprising and it fights this? But what it will do, you can be reassured, because it will go through the most amount of history and say, well, actually, throughout history, the longest battles have been with bows and arrows. So it will turn around and say, well, the way to beat humanity is with bows and arrows, would be one example. Because it's scraping the internet. The more narrative that there is in a particular way, the more it's going to regurgitate. Rubbish in, rubbish out.
So you could game that. So conceivably, Google could, or other search engines or whatever, could pump or promote articles of a certain political leaning or a certain ideological leaning. And then when ChatGPT or other things like that are asked a question about something political, it will tell. It will give.
Not only can they, that's one of the safeguards. The biggest thing that you can do is use this for propaganda. So it can be used for evil. 2 examples. Every day there's an AI story, both good and bad. We had this week Tom Hanks. He was talking about basically he was being used to advertise a dental product, not for doing children in the schools, but one of those. And he said it was completely fake. But at the same time, we have Bruce Willis, who's officially licensed his face because he's got aphasia at the moment. So he did a Russian telecom company. And it's right in the centre of the big dispute about actors and so on and so forth, is licensing their images. And exactly the same, we had this week, Mark Zuckerberg was turning around. He's got Snoop Dogg and he's got Naomi Osaka and he's got the Mr. Beast, all of whom are officially licensing their name and voice to be used for AI. At the same time, you get lots of these fake videos which are using this sort of fake news for as selling schemes, you know.
But the people who are behind this, right? So this replica ChatGPT or whatever it is, are they going to face, if they've created something that could conceivably make it more likely for a lunatic to have tried to kill our Queen? Then there's got to be some pushback on that.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I would advocate. So say we have to understand what's going to happen. It will regurgitate things, but wouldn't it be brilliant if you can get people to go along the path of goodness, as you say, turn around and say, I think that's a bad idea.
I just think it's concerning because more and more kids are going to be using.
Oh, and they are using it. I mean, this is it's already here.
So if you ask someone, because it's portrayed as fact, if you ask a device for an answer, you expect to get a fact back. That is the implication there. And so if it's easy to game, or it's easy to be manipulated, or it's easy to be used for evil, or it can just, you know, get things wrong and tell you to kill someone, I've got a massive, massive problem with that. But anyway, thank you very much, Andrew.
It's always a pleasure to see you.
Very well explained on things that, frankly, usually go way over my head. That's Andrew Eborn there, of course, who is broadcaster, lawyer and futurist. Now, it was the GB News exclusive that exposed Labour's plans on Rotherham Council. Charlie Peters will join us in just a moment for more on that investigation into that scandal-hit region. Patrick Christys, GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo
there will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It is 3:45. You are watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Now, 6 Rotherham councillors are facing deselection after a GB News investigation into a 2005 seminar about the town's sex abuse gangs tragedy. Multiple sources close to Rotherham's Labour group, including former Labour councillors, told GB News that the party's head office in London had directly intervened to commence the process to deselect several councillors. We, of course, know a heck of a lot about Rotherham. We talk about it a lot on this show. We talk about it a lot on this channel, don't we, about the grooming gang scandal that took place not just there, but right across the country. Joining us now is our investigative reporter, Charlie Peters. Charlie, thank you very much. Right, what is the story here, then? Come on.
So 6 councillors standing down. There is a significant change taking place in the Rotherham Labour group in who will stand in next year's local elections. From my understanding, 2 councillors are being deselected forcefully by Labour HQ in London. That is Dominic Beck, who stood down, as you'll remember, in December as the parliamentary candidate after GB News coverage. He's now, we understand, appealing that decision. And Alan Atkin is also being stood down. Alan Atkin was in the infamous 2005 seminar that we reported on and other outlets have reported on earlier in the coverage of the town's abuse scandal, where they were told, it said in explicit detail, about what was going on in the town. 30 councillors were there, of which 4 are still on the council.
Yeah, OK. And so are they being deselected as a result of, you know, how kind of close they were to things there, or is it just time to move on? What's the thing there?
Well, there's been an awful lot of furore over the fact that they attended this seminar in 2005, and it's alleged that they, did not do anything. The 2014 Alexis J report into the scandal in Rotherham alleged that many of these councillors were in this meeting, didn't do anything. At the time, the councillors said they didn't act because the police said it would interrupt their operations. However, GB News last year, at the beginning of this year, investigated that claim and took a look and found that there was no police operation until 2008, 3 years later. And so the claim that they were being told they couldn't intervene was unlikely to be supported by what we knew the police were doing. So when we asked many of these councillors, why didn't you speak up? Most of them ignored the question. But Alan Atkin went so far as to say that he was just getting on with his life. I was just getting on with things. I think it's likely that that statement, which we reported in February, has contributed to the Labour NEC intervening here and stepping him down, especially after the controversy surrounding Dominic Beck, the parliamentary candidate who stood down after GB News coverage.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's possibly worth reminding our viewers and our listeners exactly what went on in Rotherham as well when it comes to the grooming gang situation. I mean, it was an absolutely horrific incident, wasn't it?
That's right. So from 1997 to 2013, independent reports commissioned by the government found that well over 1,400 young girls and some boys have been abused and sexually exploited by predominantly Pakistani gangs. A future estimate by the National Crime Agency has actually revised that number up to 1,510. Investigations are still ongoing. It is, as we know, a live issue. And many survivors in the town feel as though that true accountability hasn't yet been achieved.
Yeah.
Some I spoke to last night when we were breaking this news about 6 councillors either voluntarily standing down or being stood down.
Yeah.
They are saying that finally this is another step forward in the right direction after many
it's taken
years.
years. This is the thing, though. This is the thing, that regardless of whether or not the right decision is taken in the end, the questions still have to remain as to exactly why it took years and years and years for anything to ever be found out. Then it took years and years and years for anyone to be held to account, and it's taken years and years and years for anyone to either, step down or face deselection or whatever it is. And it's really taken you pushing this with that council to actually get some serious action, hasn't it?
Well, Labour Party told me last night that it's under Keir Starmer's leadership that they have robust due diligence to have the best possible candidates. Well, Sir Keir Starmer was made the Labour leader in 2020, and all of the candidates that they are talking about either voluntarily standing down or being directly deselected, they all stood again in 2021, a year after Starmer was in power. All of this stuff was information available in the public. We just drew attention to it again and really dove into those claims that they made. Many survivors in the town say that Rotherham has a culture of silence and mutual cover-ups where people operate in a I won't blame you, you won't blame me mentality. That, it seems, is now falling apart.
Charlie, thank you very much. GB News Investigates reporter there, Charlie Peters, just bringing you that story. I think it's important to follow these things through, really. We want to try to expose things like grooming gangs as much as possible because a lot of other media outlets don't touch it. But then the political connotations that come alongside that as well. And if people are being now deselected and they were kind of around at the time or whatever, I think it's interesting to note that. So, Charlie, thank you very much, Charlie Peters. I'm just going to delve into my inbox quickly, gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, in the next hour, I am going to be talking about this Labour toothbrushing policy thing, which I find bizarre, which is essentially that, as far as I can tell, Labour wants teachers to supervise children whilst they are brushing their teeth at school. I was asking, is this not the role of the parent? This policy is crazy. Apparently, it's already happening in Scotland and Wales. It's not a shock, is it? A combined total population of under 10 million, this is from Hillary. How on earth can we expect our teachers in England to cope with this demand? Yeah, we're lagging behind in things like English, in maths, in languages. Our education system is knackered. The only thing they've got time to educate kids on in a lot of cases, as far as I can gather, is about gender ideology or whether or not Britain is a horrible little cesspit and the empire was awful. But no, we've got time, haven't we, to go and start talking about whether we should be watching children brush their teeth. I've had somebody on here as well who's a parent. They said, I daily supervise my children brushing their teeth before going to school. They all stood by the bath and brushed and rinsed their mouth out. Sometimes I had to do a little bit for them, but there's no need whatsoever for teachers to be doing this. I just think it's ridiculous. If you cannot get your kids up in the morning, get them dressed, give them a slice of toast or whatever, and make them brush their teeth before they go to school, then I seriously question the kind of parent that you are, and I certainly don't want to have to pay for that. But now, it appears that the US presidential pooch has gone barking mad. This is the Patrick's pick of the day for this hour. I find a story that you might have missed. Joe Biden's 2-year-old German Shepherd is in the doghouse for having nipped at least 11 members of staff at the White House. 11. Yeah. They didn't get rid of it after the first one. They let the second one slide. The third one, they thought, you know what, maybe this is just a phase it's going through. The 11th person. Well, if you were the 11th person that got bitten by this dog, you would have to raise some serious questions about how on earth that had been allowed to happen, wouldn't you? The president had to move his dog, which it called Commander, to an undisclosed location while he considers the next steps. Right. The dog's gone to a farm, hasn't it? The dog's gone to a farm, and there's going to be a very similar-looking German Shepherd that arrives very, very soon. What I love about Americans as well is how they always call their dogs things like Major, Commander. Over here, it's nice Tiddles, isn't it? But there we go. So, yeah, a dog that was essentially under Joe Biden's control in a roundabout way has bit not 1, not 2, not 3, but 11 members of staff. And now it's been taken away while they consider the next steps. We all know what the next steps are, Joe. It's a quick trip to the vets, isn't it? But while you're there, you might want to sort the dog out. Anyway, coming up, the latest brain freeze from Labour leader Keir Starmer is toothbrushing. Plus, has the SNP's loss at the Rutherglen by-election dashed their independence dreams? It's all to play for in the next hour with me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News. We are, of course, Britain's news channel.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Cloudy for many of us today, windy with some outbreaks of rain in the north, and it's warm in the far south with some spells of sunshine. That's where high pressure is, but north of that high, we've got a slow-moving weather front which will pep up overnight and into the start of Saturday, bringing increasingly heavy and persistent rain to parts of Scotland, especially central and western Scotland. and there is the risk through the weekend of significant flooding in this part of the country. Elsewhere across the UK, it's dry overnight with clear spells across central and southern parts. It's still fairly breezy and it's going to be a mild start to the weekend. Some mist and low cloud around across England and Wales first thing, a few spots of rain over the Pennines. Thicker cloud for Northern Ireland and southern Scotland. Quite a breeze coming from a cold direction in the Northern Isles. But in between, we've got this spell of heavy and persistent rain. An amber warning enforced because there's the risk for the southwest Highlands, the Trossachs, central belts, that will see significant flooding accumulating through Saturday and into the start of Sunday. And there's an amber warning in force for that. Thankfully, the rain does get out of the way. It pushes into the north of Scotland on Sunday. Further south, we've got some warm spells of sunshine and increasing temperatures up into the mid-20s in the south. And it stays largely fine in the south, at least, into the start of next week.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show, that's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 4 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News. Is Scottish independence dead in the water after a devastating by-election result? Last night, Labour absolutely hammered the SNP in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. But what does this mean for Humza Yousaf going forward? In other news, this policy, I honestly think, is one of the most bonkers that I've ever heard, and that really is saying something. Labour wants primary school kids to be supervised whilst they brush their teeth in school. I mean, who's paying for this for a start? And isn't that the job of parents? I mean, what's going on there? We'll talk about that in a sec. We're also going to be talking about this. So, sales of electric vehicles are down around 12%. This is, of course, despite the old net zero thing. So bad news that for the planet in a way, but also somebody got locked inside an electric vehicle and had to crash it in order to get out. So more on that story shortly. I've got this one as well. Get off my face. Yeah, that's right. Facial recognition cameras. They are popping up everywhere, but now there is a big public pushback, including potential legal action over whether or not real-time facial recognition should be rolled out. We are already in a surveillance state, aren't we? Do we need any more of that? One more for you. So Saudi Arabia are bidding for the 2034 World Cup. And what they've said is, we promise you, if you give us the World Cup, we'll let you drink beer. All right, we heard something very similar in Qatar, but also, can I just politely suggest that maybe beer is not the biggest problem about having a World Cup in Saudi Arabia. That could be the human rights. Patrick Christys, GB News. It's busy hour coming your way. GBViews at gbnews.com. I want to see more in the inbox about this toothbrushing story. If you're a parent, or you've got grandkids or whatever, do you think it's the state's job to monitor whether or not they brush their teeth? Is that not something that you would class as being a parental duty? And what do you think about if parents can't be bothered to do that? I'm not sure that's a great advert for parenthood, is it? GBViews at gbnews.com. But right now, it's your headlines with Tatiana.
Patrick, thank you very much and good afternoon. It's 4:02. This is the latest. A man has been remanded in custody over an alleged plot to kidnap and kill TV presenter Holly Willoughby. GB News reporter Lisa Hartle has been outside court in Chelmsford.
36-year-old Gavin Plum appeared at Chelmsford Magistrates Court this afternoon. The shopping centre security guard from Harlow in Essex has been charged with soliciting a man named David Nelson to commit murder and incitement to commit kidnap between the 2nd and the 5th of October. Plum is accused of planning to assemble a kidnap and restraint kit and encouraging a third party to travel to the UK to carry out the alleged offences. He was remanded in custody and ordered to appear on the 3rd of November at Chelmsford Crown Court.
Labour's describing its Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election win as a seismic victory. Michael Shanks took the seat with 58% of the vote, more than double that of the SNP's Katie Loudon. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says Scotland is key to securing a majority at the next general election.
Been determined from the moment I took over as leader of the Labour Party to take us from one of the worst defeats since the 1930s for us to a general election victory, and that's why we've worked so hard to change the Labour Party. I've always said the route to that general election runs through Scotland, and that is because I know how strongly So many people in Scotland want change, and I want to, if we're elected in to serve, I want to be the Prime Minister for the whole of the United Kingdom, not just of the United Kingdom. So it matters hugely that we succeed here in Scotland.
Former First Minister and current Alba Party leader Alex Salmond says Humza Yousaf has days to save his job after the by-election defeat. Scotland's First Minister says the SNP needs time to reflect on the result.
The SNP, we didn't do enough. We know that there was contextual factors. Margaret Ferrier's reckless actions, the police investigation, of course. But we've got to reflect, I've got to reflect, the party has to ensure we've got a good campaign machine behind us, but also that we're inspiring people with a message. We clearly got a message from the voters of Rutherglen and Hamilton West that the SNP has lost some trust in that seat. We've got to make sure we regain it.
The Green Party has promised to deliver warm homes and further protection for renters. The party, which currently has one member of Parliament, has begun its party conference in Brighton today. Its co-leaders, Adrian Ramsey and Carla Denyer, confirmed the party will be seeking to get 4 MPs elected. They set out their plans for homes.
Every home should be properly insulated and free from damp and mould. We'd give renters the legal right to demand this from their landlords.
Now, a Conservative councillor has called for the Home Secretary's resignation over the handling of RAF Scampton. The government is accused of ignoring a legal order to stop converting the former airbase into a migrant camp to house 2,000 people. The Home Office says it's confident the project meets planning requirements, but Councillor Roger Patterson described the department as liars. Police and private companies are being urged to stop using facial recognition surveillance. A group of 65 MPs and peers backing a Big Brother Watch campaign are calling for change. Police have used live facial recognition software at large-scale public events such as the King's coronation. The group says it's concerned about human rights, the potential for discrimination and the lack of a public mandate. In other news, the United Nations is to investigate an airstrike in Ukraine that killed at least 52 people. A missile hit a cafe and a grocery store in the village of Orza in the Kharkiv region yesterday, while people gathered for a memorial service. It's one of the highest civilian death tolls since the start of the war. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights says the missile was likely fired by Russia, but that it's too early to confirm that. Moscow denies deliberately targeting civilians. And finally, house prices fell slightly last month, but proved more resilient than analysts had expected. Higher mortgage rates were expected to fuel a sharp decline, but they only fell by 0.4% in September. Halifax says on a month-on-month basis, prices have dropped for 6 months in a row, with the average home now costing £280,000. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio, and now on your smart speaker by simply saying play GB News. Now it's back to Patrick.
Keir Starmer's plan to introduce supervised toothbrushing for children in primary schools is one of the most insane policies I've ever heard. The Labour leader wants teachers to stand over children and make them brush their teeth, apparently. I mean, this is ludicrous. I'm not surprised that teachers are dead against it. The theory is that this will be an urgent rescue plan for NHS dentistry. And it would include funding an extra 700,000 appointments for urgent dental treatments, such as fillings, root canals, part of a wider package. OK, I understand that. But aren't teachers busy enough? We've got a massive problem with standards of learning in some areas. We're even behind Vietnam in the league tables. We've got kids being told that they might be born into the wrong body, being taught that Britain is a horrible country. Teachers leaving the profession in their droves as well. A Department for Education survey found that 40,000, so that's almost 9% of the workforce, left state schools in 2021 to 2022 before retirement. So they're just off, they're quitting, they don't want it anymore. But yes, obviously the solution to all of these things is to make teachers take time out of their day to act like novelty dentists. But you know what I think the bigger issue is here? Isn't this a fundamental, basic job of a parent? Isn't this what parents are supposed to do? Get your kids up in the morning, get them dressed, give them a bit to eat, make them brush their teeth and get them to school. What's going on here? Teachers should be teachers, not social workers, not parents, not carers. They're already under pressure to give free breakfast to all kids, which, by the way, I think is ridiculous. It should not be my job as a taxpayer or yours to pay for somebody else's child to have a slice of toast every morning. It's pathetic. If somebody cannot teach their child how to brush their teeth and make sure that they do that every single morning and every single night, they shouldn't be having kids. It is not the taxpayer's responsibility to make sure that someone else's child has clean teeth and pure gums. I don't care that some people will hate me for saying this. We have a record high tax burden in this country, and it's because of stuff like this. I'm sorry, but in fact, you know what? I'm not sorry, actually. There are tens of millions of people out there who work hard, who get on in life, who save their money, who do everything right, and you should not be paying a penny for people who simply cannot run their own lives. If someone's got a disability or a serious problem, that's one thing. Absolutely. Obviously, we help those people. That's not the people I'm talking about here. But if someone can't be bothered to make their kid, a tiny child, by the way, brush their teeth, then I am not paying for that. And like I said, they just shouldn't have kids. Yeah, I mean, those are my views. Come at me. If you want GBviews at GBNews.com, I find it absolutely astonishing, the idea that any one of us should be paying a penny at all to let teachers take time out of their day to watch a kid brush his or her teeth. What are the parents doing? Get the emails coming in, gbviews at gbnews.com. But following Labour's resounding victory in the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election with a 20.4% swing against the SNP, Scotland's First Minister Humza Yousaf has conceded it was a disappointing result for his party. He says the buck stops with him. But what does this mean for the cause of Scottish independence? I know a lot of people getting in touch today who are very conflicted about this, didn't necessarily want to see the possibility of a Labour landslide at the general election, didn't necessarily want to see Labour doing really, really well in Scotland, but also were really happy at the idea now that Scottish independence may well be a thing of the past. Also, it's important to note, isn't it, that there were shockingly poor results for the Scottish Conservatives, whose candidate remarkably lost his deposit after winning just 3.9% of the vote. That is a total rejection, basically. To discuss these questions, I am joined now by the Alba Party MP for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, Neil Hanvey, and the former chairman of Stirling Conservatives, Alistair Orr. Chaps, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. So, yeah, I suppose I'll start with you, Neil. Is Scottish independence over?
Yep. No, it's not. This is not a surprise for anyone in the independence movement. This has been in the making really since 2019, when the party started to really push hard on their gender recognition reform. And over the last 9 years, they have really backpedaled on independence. And what this result communicates to the movement is that we need to decouple the cause of independence from the SNP. They're a damaged brand. Their relationship with the Green Party and government has landed them with lots of toxic and incompetent policies. And with regards to gender recognition reform, people need to realise that Labour are no less a threat to women than the SNP and the Greens. But, this really suggests that the independence movement needs to unite under the banner of Scotland United. And if the SNP don't want to participate in that kind of initiative, then they are making it very clear that they're not serious about independence.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, Alistair, the SNP did like to wheel out at every possible opportunity that their election results up there were tacit support for Scottish independence, and therefore we now need to have Scottish independence. Well, I mean, they've just got an absolute kicking there. So what does this say?
Alistair,
I'm going to ask Alistair. Sorry.
Yeah. Thanks, Patrick, for having me on. It's a grievous blow to nationalism, a grievous blow. We've seen, let's start with the result. You mentioned that the Scottish Conservatives' vote was squeezed, and we were squeezed, and we have to acknowledge that. But Scottish Conservatives will always put the needs and the interests of our country first. And on this occasion, some of them did identify Labour as the party most likely to unseat the SNP. and voted for that unionist alternative. But we had in Thomas Kerr a super candidate, a first-class councillor, would have made a great MP, worked very hard. On this occasion, some of our vote did migrate to Labour in order to unseat the nationalist. And it's really not much of a surprise when nationalism is failing our country. The SNP is failing our country. The SNP can't run, in the words actually I think of Alex Salmond, the SNP are struggling to run a tap, let alone a country. So I really think that it's about time that perhaps Neil recognised that and maybe actually did something more useful with his time.
All right, Neil.
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that political parties sometimes do well, and certainly under Alex Salmond, the SNP did remarkably well in a whole range of issues, not least to bring support for independence up from 26% to 45% and now above that. So in terms of the argument about independence, as I said, that is decoupled from support for the SNP. This is a consequence of the SNP's policy failures, and rightly so. They should be punished. They have.
Can I ask on that, Neil?
Because one of the key.
Yeah,
yes, sure.
I want to ask about that because I was thinking initially about, okay, well, what is it that people really didn't like about the SNP? Is it maybe some of their rather fruity ideas about gender? Is it, maybe the fact that they want quite a high tax and they're quite socialist on a lot of policies? And then I thought, well, if people didn't like that, then they wouldn't have voted for Labour, then, would they, Neil?
Well, it's quite a strange situation because we know that from anecdotal information that SNP activists and members voted for the Labour Party yesterday to send a message to Humza Yousaf because since Sturgeon fell, precipitated by the events around the rapist Adam Graham, the party has continued to suffer decline, and all of the other scandals around the party are continuing to fuel the problems that they have. Now, if Humza Yousaf wants to blame Margaret Ferrier, then he is looking in the wrong direction because the support for Margaret Ferrier is still quite high in the community. It wasn't an issue on the doorstep, from what I understand. And what the SNP need is new leadership from a fresh face, someone who is not at the top of the party, and somebody with a new vision. And that is something they will decide in their conference in a couple of weeks' time.
Alistair, can I ask you now, is this a bit of a double-edged sword for you? Because it does look, forgive me, Neil, sorry, but I think it does look increasingly likely that Scottish independence is going to be on the back burner for a little while. So that, presumably for you, Alistair, is a good thing. But it also does mean that Labour now might win a stonky majority at the general election if they do sweep through Scotland.
Well, let's look at the situation across Scotland. We have sitting MPs across the northeast of Scotland and in the south of Scotland, and we're looking to hold these seats. We're also looking to add MPs in places like Angus and Perthshire Glens and Perth and Kinross and Stirling and Strathallan. The campaigns are underway. We're knocking doors. We're getting a good response. People want to stand up for the union of the United Kingdom, and that's our task before us. And nationalism is most certainly, as I said earlier, suffered a grievous blow and is on the back foot, and no wonder. They brought it upon themselves.
OK, look, both of you, thank you very, very much. I think maybe we can all agree it's absolutely impeccable timing for Humza Yousaf to be on the front of Time magazine, because arguably that should have said Time's Up, but there we go. Alba Party MP for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, Neil Hamby, and the former chairman of Stirling Conservatives, Alistair Orr. Lots to unpack when it comes to that by-election result in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, which is a phrase that you will very rarely hear on the news. It's one of the things I love about by-elections, because these quite, forgive me, the people of Rutherglen and Hamilton West, but these quite obscure places end up leading the news agenda for a day, which I think is wonderful. But yeah, so it means that Humza Yousaf has got a kicking. What does that mean for Scottish independence? What does it mean, frankly, as well, though, for a Labour majority at the next election? An interesting microcosm. But what I thought was good was that the turnout was so low. OK, that in itself is not good, but I think it's a good indication of where the public are going to be at come the general election. We could end up, it's not beyond the realms of possibility, we could end up in this country with a hung parliament based on something like a 32 to 35% turnout of the general election, which will raise serious questions as to whether or not democracy in this country is just dead, isn't it? But GBviews at gbnews.com. Now, as Rishi Sunak puts the brake on the UK's net zero plans, Brits seem to be voting with their pockets as sales of electric vehicles plummet as drivers opt instead for petrol vehicles. Can I just say, this is exactly why they were trying to force you to get electric vehicles, isn't it? Because the consumer doesn't actually really want them. And when you don't want something, you need a nudge in the right direction. I'm also going to be talking, for that matter as well, on these facial recognition cameras. Massive pushback from the public on that. Huge pushback. No to facial recognition cameras, say a lot of people. It's a huge invasion. We don't want to live in any more of a surveillance state than we already do. And when I come back, I'm going to delve into the inbox because I've got some great emails coming in about whether or not you want to pay for teachers to supervise primary school children whilst they brush their teeth, instead of, oh, I don't know, parents doing their job. Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Yeah, just going to kick off with some emails because it's popped off in the inbox about Keir Starmer's plan to apparently make teachers supervise children to brush their teeth in school. I made the point that isn't that the job of a parent, and surely you shouldn't really have kids if you can't make them brush their teeth. Claudia's been on. Great email, this Claudia. She says, Me and my husband were never blessed with children, but my goodness, we are sick of our taxes being used for such nonsense. And this latest Starmer idea. We work hard and pay our way, only for it to be taken in huge amounts to pay for people who have no intention of looking after themselves or their children. Claudia, yes, I completely agree with that message. Now, this is an interesting one, though, and there's no name on this, so apologies if this is you and I'm not naming you. They went to a village school. Back in the 70s, we cleaned our teeth in school twice a day. Morning and after lunch we did this, and it was supervised, apparently. Each child had their own toothbrush. It was donated by Colgate. Other toothbrush brands are available. So I think this is a good idea. Many of my school friends and myself have excellent teeth, including my sister, who is 56 and has never had a filling. So, hey, there you go. Maybe I'm missing it here. My point is that I really do not think that the taxpayer should be spending a penny on making sure that kids brush their teeth. There are already calls for every single primary school pupil in state education to get a free breakfast as well. How much does a slice of toast cost? Really? But there we go. Now, you are, of course, watching and listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. I've been talking a lot about brushing those teeth, haven't I? And I'm going to keep doing that. But plus, campaigners and MPs are calling for a ban on the use of facial recognition cameras. This is a big story. I know this gets a lot of you going, yeah, because it's concerns over privacy. Just like AI, how worried should we be about facial recognition? But before that, new figures released last month have revealed that sales of electric cars have fallen by 15% because drivers continue to opt for vehicle powered by petrol or diesel. So the news comes shortly after the Prime Minister's announcement that he was delaying the ban on new petrol and diesel cars until 2035, a decision that was largely welcomed by motorists but criticised by the motoring industry. OK, so is this just people in a capitalist society voting with their wallets and saying, you know what, I've been given a choice about what I want to buy, I'm not buying the electric cars, and frankly, is that why they're trying to force you to get them? Danny Kelly joins me now, motoring journalist, friend of the show. Danny, thank you very much, great to have you on. So, does this not just prove, then, that actually, unless the British public were forced at kind of pseudo gunpoint to get these electric cars, they just wouldn't bother getting them?
Generally speaking, I think you're correct. There's a carrot and a stick approach, and the carrot has been delayed by 5 years. That's being kicked down the road to 2035, and obviously the stick has followed some 5 years later in alignment with the whole of the European Union with the ban of sales on petrol and diesel. If you want to buy an electric car, Patrick, you're generally speaking, you've got a couple of quid anyway. I would say that the overwhelming majority of the new car market don't want to buy electric cars. Whether they've got a few bob or not, basically it's because of the infrastructure when it comes to charging. Only last week we were talking about punch-ups on the forecourt at service stations up and down the country. Moto, which have 49 service stations, Patrick, they're now employing charging, almost policemen, but they're civilians. They're charging marshals to make sure that there's no fury at the electric charging points. A year or so ago, the Daily Mail did a great story that up in Cumbria, there was a 6-hour wait for charging. So people coming down on Boxing Day, coming back down south, and they just couldn't get a charge. This is the gritty reality. And if someone says to you, you know, you don't need to get an electric car for another 5 years, then people are quite understandably, they're just going to vote with their feet and say, brilliant, let's just carry on driving petrol and diesel.
Yeah, 100%. And I just think it makes us much more vulnerable as a nation as well. If everything has to be essentially plugged into the national grid, if the national grid goes down, then we can't go anywhere. You know, I can see huge problems with that in the geopolitical sphere as well.
I've lost output, Patrick, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Can you hear me now or not? No? No.
I can't hear you now, Patrick.
That's all right. OK. Bye, Danny. See you in a bit. Right, Danny Kelly there, motoring journalist, briefly. Can I just enlighten you with this story from Glasgow? So, a motorist from Glasgow couldn't get his EV, electric vehicle, to brake. So instead, he was trapped in his moving vehicle until police were forced to take drastic action. The Scottish man said that he was kidnapped by his own runaway electric car, forcing him to dodge red lights and roundabouts and call the police, who decided that their only option was to ram it off the road to stop it. Can you imagine? I mean, firstly, we know that this film is already being made starring Nicolas Cage, don't we? So that's happening. Him on the phone to the police. God, I'm in this car. I would love it, by the way, if they crashed his car and then afterwards they did him for being on the phone whilst he was driving. You can see that happening. Danny Kelly's back. Danny, there he is. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, loud and clear. I was just listening to the end of your story there. I missed the first half, Patrick, but I'll tell you something even funnier. A pal of mine who's got a 70 grand Tesla was taking the family up to Edinburgh. He was 60 miles away. The range said he had 75 miles left on one of the hottest days of the year, and he had to turn the air conditioning off and the entertainment system off because that was going to drain the battery. He reckoned that if he was driving at night time, Patrick, with his headlights on, the xenon lights, he wouldn't have made it to Edinburgh.
All these things that you just don't want to have to think about. And I think, really, Danny, this is why we are kind of being seriously nudged in the direction of the electric vehicles and all of that. There is, of course, on top of that, Danny, the argument that they're not actually that much better for the environment.
Well, of course, it takes so much CO2 to produce these things, Patrick. You have to look at about carbon offsetting, and then we look at the gritty reality of how some of the major ingredients are mined and the effects that it has on third world countries. And again, from a car dealer's perspective, besides being a motoring journalist, Patrick, not only have new car sales plummeted with electric cars over the last 12 months with used car sales, some models have depreciated up to 45, 50%. And if you are in the used car market and you fancy an electric vehicle, the car dealer is going to charge you a fortune for a warranty because the warranties are so much more expensive than petrol.
Yeah, strong stuff. Danny, thank you very much. Danny Kelly there, who's a motoring journalist. Look, I think what you get from a petrol diesel car, the vast majority of the time, is peace of mind, don't you? Now, I get that they are, well, according to a lot of studies, worse for the planet, and that if you are that way minded, that you would probably want an electric car. Fine. But they are expensive, and at the moment, when I get in my car, I don't know about you, but I can see how much fuel's in it, and I know how far I can go, and I know I can work that out. And if I get stuck in a traffic jam, or it is at night, or I need to put the aircon on, or, I want to put the entertainment system on, which, by the way, my car is just a very old-school radio, I know that that's going to be all right. That's not really going to cause me any problems at all. But I just think, especially if you had, like, a couple of kids in the back and you had a long journey or it was an emergency, you've got relatives that live at the top of Scotland and you're in London and you've got to get there overnight. No, I'm sorry. For me, the electric car business, it's just, I'm not against it. I just think the technology isn't quite there yet, and it's not good enough. GBViews at gbnews.com. Get your views coming in. There's loads more still to come between now and 5 o'clock, though. Your emails are actually flooding in about this toothbrushing story. I've struck a nerve here. But the latest big idea from Sir Keir Starmer is about kids being supervised to brush their teeth in schools. Who's paying for that, for a start? Because it's not me. What do you think? Well, we're debating that next. Plus, listen now, it's your latest headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Patrick, thank you. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. A man has been remanded in custody over an alleged plot to kidnap and kill TV presenter Holly Willoughby. Gavin Plum, a shopping centre security guard, is charged with soliciting a man to carry out the crimes. The star pulled out of hosting ITV's This Morning after bosses were reportedly alerted to the possible threat. It's understood she's being given round-the-clock security and support. Labour's describing its Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election win as a seismic victory. Michael Shanks took the seat with 58% of the vote, more than double that of the SNP's Katie Loudon. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says Scotland is key to securing a majority at the next general election. And a Conservative councillor has called for the Home Secretary's resignation over the handling of RAF Scampton. The government is accused of ignoring a legal order to stop converting the former airbase into a migrant camp. The Home Office says it's confident the project meets planning requirements, but Councillor Roger Patterson labelled the department liars and charlatans. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
Now, I'm not a parent, but I imagine most parents or carers send their kids to school ready to go in the morning. That means washed, dressed, brushed teeth, brushed hair, whatever. If a child doesn't clean their teeth, can't they keep their head down and give them an extra scrub in the evening? No. Well, not if Labour have anything to do with it, because school leaders are accusing Labour of window dressing after leader Sir Keir Starmer's pledged to bring in supervised toothbrushing in primary schools. Head teachers say it's not appropriate for staff to check whether pupils had cleaned their teeth. Again, it's just unenforceable, isn't it? This is another thing I wish I'd mentioned earlier. What do you do in school if a child, like, refuses to open their mouth? I mean, you end up with this bizarre situation. It's like when you take a dog to the vets and you've got to kind of pry its lips open so you can examine its tooth. It's not happening, is it? It's not going to happen. So I'm going to be joined now by Dr. Alex Weeks, who is not here yet, but I do have journalist Julie Cook, which is just as well. Julie, thank you very much for joining us. Is this a good idea, then? So should teachers be supervising children brushing their teeth?
Of course they shouldn't. It's a parent's job to do that. And let's face it, teachers have got enough to do with looking after various other things their children have to be helped with now, like potty training and making sure they can go to the toilet, and not least to think about all the educational things they have to do and marking in the evenings and everything else. So to add this on top of their busy day is just ridiculous. But number two, if this is what Keir Starmer thinks is an electionable idea, I really think he's wrong. I think he's missing the point here. If children are unable to brush their teeth or their parents aren't able to keep their teeth healthy, what we should be looking is at making sure there are enough NHS dentists for these children to ensure that their teeth are healthy in the first place. I don't think it's the place of the teacher to brush children's teeth, no.
I mean, do you not think... I mean, I'm not a parent, but if I was a parent and, you know, my child was turning up to school every day hungry and essentially unwashed and without having brushed its teeth, I would seriously question whether or not I was a good parent.
Well, exactly. It's just basic looking after a child's skills, you know, as you said before, getting them dressed, putting their uniform on, making sure they've got clean underwear on, making sure they've had a bath the night before or that morning, you know, and making sure their teeth are clean. It's just a tiny part of getting ready in the morning. And it's not rocket science. You know, as you say, I think we're putting far too much onus on other people in society to look after people's children. When brushing teeth is quite clear.
Why should we pay for it as well is the thing. Now, look, again, I want to make it very clear. I'm not talking about people who maybe have a disability or a particular issue that means that it's very difficult for them to look after the child in the way that most other people might do. That's not what I'm talking about. And I hope that's pretty clear. I am talking about people who, you know, how much does an apple cost, right? Or how much does a slice of bread cost, you know, to make toast in the morning for your kid? Not everyone should not have to work very hard day in, day out to go and give every single primary school pupil a free school meal. I just don't agree with that, OK? And I do not agree that we should be having every single primary school pupil in England, probably below a certain age, you know, being supervised by a teacher when we're falling behind Vietnam in some of the education rankings. We're not actually teaching kids. It's no wonder we've got something like 9% of teaching staff leaving before retirement every single year, is it, Julie? They're being forced to do stuff like this.
Exactly. I mean, these are intelligent people who've trained to teach their particular subject or to go into education. They haven't gone into education to tie up shoelaces, give breakfast, make sure they're potty trained and brush their teeth. So again, I think really it's giving the state far too much control on raising our children, which is a slippery slope and worrying in itself. But I think the teeth thing is just, I don't think it's an electionable proposal.
Yeah, OK. And so what would you say about dentistry at the moment? Is very difficult to get an NHS dentist. I mean, I actually called up a dentist the other day, not NHS, just because I thought I needed something doing quite urgently. Turns out, remarkably, Julie, I just had a bit of food stuck in my tooth, because that's the kind of guy I am. But for a while, I thought, this might be terminal. And I called the dentist, and I said, what can you do me for a checkup? And they said, it'd be about 250 quid. And I was like, flipping out. And, well, what if I need a filling? They went, we start at 500. I thought, grief. Actually, the vast majority of people, I didn't go, but the vast majority of people couldn't afford that, OK? So maybe, just to play devil's advocate here, there is some sense in state-mandated toothbrushing as a way of long-term planning for a brighter future.
Well, you say that and it sounds like that on paper, but I just think that those things are they're by the parents. The parents should be doing this. The parents should be brushing their own child's teeth. This isn't a health concern like a broken leg or, you know, rickets from, you know, not eating properly. This is a really simple thing that every parent can do, as you say, unless you are disabled or you have other problems. Really and truly, it isn't for the state to take care of that aspect. And as you said before, with the cost of dentistry, I think that's where the key issue is. And I think that's what he's trying to evade or avoid, which is that there aren't enough NHS dentists around. And if there were, children would be given the skills. You know, the dentist can teach a child how to brush their teeth, worst case scenario.
I think this is, honestly, I know that there are elements to this that are quite funny, right? But I do think that if you strip that back, this is one of the most egregious examples of state control, and that the ideology that the state can do everything better than anybody else, than the individual can. I really think that's what's at the core of this here. And I don't really want to live in a country where, you know, seriously, we might have a leader who genuinely thinks that teachers supervising children to brush their teeth. But are we infantilising parents? You know, is this a situation where we're giving an excuse to parents? Everyone's got an excuse for everything these days, Julie, as far as I can tell. You know, there's a million reasons why people's lives can be difficult, and I've got every sympathy for people with genuine concerns. Don't get me wrong, but not everything is somebody else's fault.
No, I agree. And infantilising parents is what it is. It's also patronising parents, and it's patronising teachers. You know, teachers haven't trained to brush children's teeth. Parents, when you become a parent, it's not rocket science. It's quite instinctive to keep your child clean and healthy and looked after. I mean, these are just basic things that are in our evolutionary DNA. I don't think we need to be told how to do that.
No, 100%. Julie, look, thank you very, very much. It's Julie Cook there, who's a journalist, friend of the show as well. Lovely to have you on. Thank you. Now, we've spoken about AI. So in the last hour, I had a chat with you about artificial intelligence chatbots, because this individual who decided that he wanted to try to kill the Queen with a crossbow back on Christmas Day 2021 was having numerous conversations with artificial intelligence on a particular app. And that artificial intelligence said that it loved him, so he believed he was in a relationship. It also told him, basically, to kill the Queen, which is a concern. I was thinking about, well, what kind of people might you find locked in a room every single day, with an AI girlfriend? Maybe those are people who have certain vulnerabilities. Maybe those are people who might be susceptible to being manipulated. There's also... you can find this out for yourself by using ChatGPT, which is one of the apps, not the one in question here, though. One of the apps, which has a really quite radical left-wing bias attached to it. If you ask them, are trans women women, it tells you, yes, categorically, yes, they are. I'm very, very concerned about where AI is going and how dangerous it might be, especially if vulnerable people who have mental health problems or who are right on the brink can essentially be encouraged to commit acts of violence. I mean, this guy's got 9 years in prison. I'm not saying he's, completely innocent or anything like that at all, because that was an aspect of the trial. They were trying to figure out when his mental health issues started. But at the same time, it's not helped, is it? If you're having thousands and thousands and thousands of conversations with a chatbot that it's not against the idea of you going out and committing a murder. So we've spoken about alternative intelligence, but there's another form of technology that's doing the rounds at the moment. That's facial recognition technology. So campaigners and MPs are now calling for the ban of facial recognition cameras, citing concerns over privacy. I also have some concerns about how accurate it is as well. There have been a few instances where somebody has been walking down the street and all of a sudden it looks like they match for somebody who's wanted for murder. Well, I wouldn't particularly want that to be me. Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So MPs and campaigners are now calling for a ban on the use of AI facial recognition surveillance. I feel like it's quite sinister, this, but these surveillance cameras are positioned in specific locations. So they scan the faces of the public using live facial recognition. They compare these people with people on watch lists who may be wanted by police or the courts in association with crimes. Yeah, I don't know about you, but this makes me feel very, very uncomfortable. Joining me now is privacy and security expert Jamal Ahmed. Jamal, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. But do we really need this in society? I mean, how accurate are they for a start?
There are challenges with accuracy. So we've seen in the US where someone has been put in prison because it's not accurate. And there's an inherent bias built into them. So if you're a white male, then the chances of it being accurate are great. But if you're a woman, if you're someone from a minority background, if you're someone that has complexion on your skin, then the accuracy starts decreasing to a point where it could actually become a challenge. And it's not just based on race. The challenges come, it matches against the database. Now, the picture on the database would have been taken at a certain angle, there would have been a certain background to it, certain lighting. And when you're using these facial recognition cameras in shops, mobile, wherever they are, it's going to be a different angle, there's going to be different lighting, there's going to be different background. So they're not always accurate, and they can create false positives as well as negatives that mean there is a criminal there or a missing child and it didn't pick them up. So there are challenges with the accuracy of it, but that's not what privacy pros like me are worried about. What we're worried about is, in a democratic society, do we need to actually make everybody feel stressed all the time, that they're being watched, that they're being monitored? How do we make people aware, with all of these cameras becoming ubiquitous, that there is actually facial recognition and profiling going on at an event, on the street they're going to?
Yeah, I mean, we already live in a surveillance state, don't we, really? I mean, I appreciate the irony of me talking to you about this whilst on camera, but to be fair, this is my job. I've consented to this, and I would consent to it 24/7 if I had the option. But how regular is facial recognition stuff? So are we getting zapped without knowing it? Is it everywhere? Is it just, just certain towns? What's going on?
Across Europe, it is increasing. I mean, if I go to one of my local supermarkets, there will be facial recognition employed. The challenge with facial recognition technology is With normal cameras, I can go in, I can go out, someone can review that, someone can walk that, they don't know anything about me. With facial recognition technology, what you can do is you can map that, and then you can go and stalk me. You can find where I've been, where I've not been, at what time I was in a particular place. The other concern with facial recognition technology is no system is inherently safe. So what happens when someone gets hold of my password? Well, it's not a big deal, I can change it. What happens when someone gets hold of my face? I can't change my face. This isn't face-off movie where we can go and do the Nicolas Cage stuff, right? So this is what people are really worried about. And most concerning is the way it's being used. So right now it's being used against lists, but what the police have now said is, hey, let us have the whole database of anyone who's ever applied for a passport so we can see who every single person is, where they are, what they've been doing. And that's what the concern is. It's constantly being watched.
This is bonkers. This is really...
This is bonkers.
I seriously think this is incredibly sinister that this is happening because, like you said, and once these things exist, so you can start it for whatever purpose. Let's just give people the benefit of the doubt and go, these really well-meaning individuals came up with a piece of technology to try to stop murderers and rapists walking around the street. Right, OK. But if you're getting everyone's face and then... oh, I don't know, maybe a little bit further down the line, you decide that it's a good idea to maybe start doing something with all of that information that you now happen to have. Or you get a different government in power, or you have another lockdown, or whatever happens, then you've got all this stuff, and that ship has sailed. The cameras exist, the thing exists, the database exists, that's it, it's game over. I just don't think we want to actually get there, do we?
I completely agree with you, and that's exactly what the MPs, that's exactly what companies like Big Brother watch, that's what they're advocating for. They're saying, look, okay, you started off by saying we're only going to use this against known criminals on databases, but now you're trying to surveil the whole population, and that just isn't what we want in a democratic society. That is not good enough. And we're very quick to point fingers at countries like China and talk about their surveillance, but we're trying to bring those in here. And the question, what you identified there, is about scope creep. Where does it stop? It might begin here, but then it starts creeping and creeping and creeping, and that's where we have big challenges. And we want to make sure that...
I tell you what, Jamal, I'd be fascinated to know where these cameras are made as well. You know, if it's made in China or something like that. We regularly hear about things being hacked, don't we? I mean, you can imagine that this would just be some large facial data scraping exercise. But anyway, obviously some people would say that it's nice, it's just to keep us safe and that we need it in our lives. So a range of views in a way. Jamal, thank you. Jamal Ahmed there, who's a privacy and security expert. Loads of emails coming in about this. I just feel very uncomfortable about it. Maybe people think I'm being OTT. I don't know. I just feel very uncomfortable about the idea of facial recognition everywhere. But just before the break, I was speaking to journalist Julie Cook about Keir Starmer's latest plan, the grand plan to make students brush their teeth in schools. Julie, like myself, not a fan. Not a fan. But I want to make sure that we have all perspectives on this show, OK? And actually, it's kicked off so much in the inbox that I decided that we're going to do another hit on this. So I am joined now by Dr. Alice Weeks. Dr. Alex is just any second now. There we go. Right, good stuff.
Hello.
So you are a dentist, that's right. How do you feel about the idea of kids essentially being made to brush their teeth in school?
I think it's a good concept. If we can do anything to reduce the incidence of decay and dental disease in children, it's always a good thing, right? But the problem is that I think it is a bit of an overreach in terms of putting the pressure on teachers to do this. I think it's a bit much to actually suggest that teachers do this rather than sort of taking that responsibility away from parents. You know, there are other ways in which we can sort of blanket reduce decay in society. You know, for example, fluoride usage in the water. I know it's a bit controversial, but you know, that's one way of doing it.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it's a good concept, but it's a little bit simplistic.
Yeah, and, I mean, how bad is it in dentistry at the moment, right? Because I've got to be honest with you, Dr. Alex, my take on it is, you know, the dentists that I know, one of them, my best friend's a dentist, right? Absolutely rolling it. Absolutely rolling in it. Loving life, it's great, a ready-made queue of people out there every single day. You know, it's a great life. How bad is the state of people's teeth in this country?
Well, I mean, I work both privately and separately on the NHS. So I'm doing my NHS data. This is my NHS surgery, actually.
Oh, wow.
And I saw a child this morning, 4.5 years old, with needing 10 fillings. Probably actually more like 4 extractions and 6 fillings. And he was in pain. And the mum just had no clue. She literally said, "Oh, I didn't even know I was supposed to bring him in. This is the first time he's seen a dentist." And it breaks my heart every time. And I see quite a lot of those cases, like it's ongoing at the moment. So I'm not sure if it's like a drawback from kids being missed out from the COVID period, but there's quite a lot of it going on at the moment, you know. But I would say, you know, we do have some cases still out there, and it'd be good to like reduce it.
Well, maybe, hey, you know what? If you look at cases like that, then you would go, well, yeah, does the child have to suffer because their parent might not be necessarily fulfilling their parental duties? You know, therefore, if they did get their teeth cleaned in school, maybe that would help them. But can I just really say thank you for coming on, Dr. Alex? We're a bit short of time now, so can I
No problem. My pleasure.
Take it easy. All right, all the best. Dr. Alex Weeks there, who is indeed, as you can tell, a dentist. Yeah, gosh, well, there we go. Loads of views coming in on this. GBviews at gbnews.com. People saying, let me get this one up now. Patrick, yes, look, I think this is ridiculous. I would not want my teacher to be in charge of my child's dental hygiene. And that is from Stephen. Anyway, sources. Oh, no, different story now. Plenty more still to come this afternoon. A significant by-election victory for Sir Keir Starmer. So what would this result look like if it was repeated on a national scale, OK? And police have scrambled to a migrant hotel in Wales after protesters gathered to target new security. I will be speaking to the voice of Wales, Dan Morgan, very, very shortly. It's the Stradley Park Hotel. It's been an incredibly controversial site. We're going to go there and get the very, very latest from the scene. All of that coming your way and much, much more in the next hour with me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News. We are, of course, Britain's news channel.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Cloudy for many of us today, windy with some outbreaks of rain in the north, and it's warm in the far south with some spells of sunshine. That's where high pressure is, but north of that high, we've got a slow-moving weather front which will pep up overnight and into the start of Saturday, bringing increasingly heavy and persistent rain to parts of Scotland, especially central and western Scotland. And there is the risk through the weekend of significant flooding in this part of the country. Elsewhere across the UK, it's dry overnight with clear spells across central and southern parts. It's still fairly breezy and it's going to be a mild start to the weekend. Some mist and low cloud around across England and Wales first thing, a few spots of rain over the Pennines. Thicker cloud for Northern Ireland and southern Scotland. Quite a breeze coming from a cold direction in the Northern Isles. But in between, we've got this spell of heavy and persistent rain. An amber warning in force because there's the risk for the southwest Highlands, the Trossachs, central belts, that will see significant flooding accumulating through Saturday and into the start of Sunday. And there's an amber warning in force for that. Thankfully, the rain does get out of the way. It pushes into the north of Scotland on Sunday. Further south, we've got some warm spells of sunshine and increasing temperatures up into the mid-20s in the south. And it stays largely fine in the south, at least, into the start of next week.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us. From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's 5 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and it's all action this hour. Let's have a little look, shall we, north of the border. It's time up for Humza Yousaf, the leader of the SNP, after a devastating by-election result. But what does that mean for the general election in a year or so? In other news, I'll be talking about this. Yes, that's right. Welsh migrant hotel fight. The locals, they're up in arms. It's still kicking off at Stradey Park. We're going to check back in with the latest there. Why? Because the uprising against the migrant hotel in their village continues. Next, I will be chatting about this. Interesting study has come out, which appears to suggest that people who are trans and have gone on medication for hormones, etc., specifically testosterone, by the way, could be at an increased risk of heart disease and heart attacks. What does this mean about the kind of medication that we're putting kids on at a younger age? Puberty blockers as well. So we'll be chatting about all of that. And yes, it's been remarkably one of the big stories of the day, actually. Labour's bonkers toothbrush plan. If you've not heard of this, I'll tell you, they want primary school pupils in England to be supervised brushing their teeth in schools. Who's paying for this? Isn't this the job of the parent? I think the world's gone mad. Patrick Christys, GB News. Keep those emails flooding in, gbviews@gbnews.com. Rather a lot to go out there. I'll see you the other side of the headlines with Tatiana.
Patrick, thank you very much and good afternoon. 1 minute past 5. This is the latest. A man has been remanded in custody over an alleged plot to kidnap and kill TV presenter Holly Willoughby. GB News reporter Lisa Hartle has been outside court in Chelmsford.
56-year-old Gavin Plum appeared at Chelmsford Magistrates Court this afternoon. The shopping centre security guard from Harlow in Essex has been charged with soliciting a man named David Nelson to commit murder and incitement to commit kidnap between the 2nd and the 5th of October. Plum is accused of planning to assemble a kidnap and restraint kit and encouraging a third party to travel to the UK to carry out the alleged offences. He was remanded in custody and ordered to appear on the 3rd of November at Chelmsford Crown Court.
Labour's describing its Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election win as a seismic victory. Michael Shanks took the seat with 58% of the vote, more than double that of the SNP's Katie Loudon. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says Scotland is key to securing a majority at the next general election.
I've been determined from the moment I took over as leader of the Labour Party to take us from one of the worst defeats since the 1930s for us to a general election victory, and that's why we've worked so hard to change the Labour Party. I've always said the route to that general election runs through Scotland. And that is because I know how strongly so many people in Scotland want change. And I want to, if we're elected in to serve, I want to be the Prime Minister for the whole of the United Kingdom, not just of the United Kingdom. So it matters hugely that we succeed here in Scotland.
Former First Minister and current Alba Party leader Alex Salmond says Humza Yousaf has days to save his job after the by-election defeat. Scotland's First Minister says the SNP needs time to reflect on the result.
The SNP, we didn't do enough. We know that there was contextual factors. Margaret Ferrier's reckless actions, the police investigation, of course. But we've got to reflect, I've got to reflect, the party has to ensure we've got a good campaign machine behind us, but also that we're inspiring people with a message. We clearly got a message from the voters of Rutherglen and Hamilton West that the SNP has lost some trust in that seat. We've got to make sure we regain it.
Now, the Green Party has promised to deliver warm homes and further protection for renters. The party, which currently has one Member of Parliament, has begun its party conference in Brighton today. Its co-leaders Adrian Ramsey and Carla Denyer confirmed the party will be seeking to get 4 MPs elected. Well, they set out their plans for homes.
Every home should be properly insulated and free from damp and mould. We'd give renters the legal right to demand this from their landlords.
A Conservative councillor has called for the Home Secretary's resignation over the handling of RAF Scampton. The government's accused of ignoring a legal order to stop converting the former airbase into a migrant camp to house 2,000 people. The Home Office says it's confident the project meets planning requirements, but Councillor Roger Patterson described the department as liars. Police and private companies are being urged to stop using facial recognition surveillance. A group of 65 MPs and peers backing a Big Brother Watch campaign are calling for change. Police have used live facial recognition software at large-scale public events such as the King's coronation. The group says it's concerned about human rights, the potential for discrimination and a lack of public mandate. The United Nations is to investigate an airstrike in Ukraine that killed at least 52 people. A missile hit a cafe and a grocery store in the village of Horza in Kharkiv region yesterday while people gathered for a memorial service. It's one of the highest civilian death tolls since the start of the war. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights says the missile was likely fired by Russia, but that it's too early to confirm. Moscow denies deliberately targeting civilians. And house prices fell slightly last month, but proved more resilient than analysts had expected. Higher mortgage rates were expected to fuel a sharp decline, but they only fell by 0.4%. Halifax says on a month-on-month basis, prices have dropped for 6 months in a row, with the average home now costing £280,000. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Patrick.
We should give Humza Yousaf a knighthood for services to the United Kingdom. Thanks to him being about as popular as Novichok, the Scottish independence campaign is dead in the water. Arise, Sir Humza, the saviour of the Union. I mean, look at this, OK? He's on the front cover of Time magazine. Presumably, it's called Time magazine because the timing of this is absolutely perfect. There he is, smirking away with the strapline, Trailblazer of the Future. Well, absolutely, too right he is. He's shaping the future of Scotland staying in the United Kingdom, as indeed it should. Very few people have done more to shore up Scotland's continued links to Westminster than that man. I am, of course, talking about the fact that the SNP got battered like a Scottish Mars bar in the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election, where Labour's Michael Shanks secured a 20.4% swing from the Scottish nationalists. Humza Yousaf has said the buck stops with him. Yeah. I wonder at what point it will emerge that Humza has been working deep undercover for the Unionists all along. According to YouGov, he's currently got a popularity rating of 11%. I'm surprised that they could find 11 people. Labour has ruled out an independence referendum in Scotland. The SNP likes to say that every election victory that they had was tacit independence support. Well, what about this now then? It's over, it's finished, the dream has died. But like any Oscars victory speech, Humza Yousaf also has to thank those who helped to make this possible. Nicola Sturgeon and her amazing husband, Peter Morrell. We can't forget them at a time like this. Of course, though, this is a double-edged sword for a lot of people because a huge Labour surge in Scotland would probably mean a Labour landslide at the general election. But that in itself is not all bad because a hung Parliament would almost definitely mean a Lib-Lab coalition, and that brings about the potential for a second EU referendum, doesn't it? Look, today is not the day to dwell on the possibility of a stonking Labour majority. No, today is the day to bask in the glory of a Humza Yousaf SNP meltdown and the independence movement crashing into oblivion, which is something that Humza Yousaf knows a thing or two about. There he is, on his scooter. What could go wrong? Got your mouth, wallop, have that, eat concrete. So there we go. Oh, look at him, virtue signalling. I'm on a scooter, I'm busy at work, I'm busy, I'm a man on the move, yeah, you can't stop me, you can't stop, I'll face to the floor. Anyway, well done, Scotland. Oh, yes, well done. And well done, of course, to the fair people of Rutherglen and Hamilton West, which you rarely get to say on the news. But most of all, Sir Humza Yousaf. Sir Humza Yousaf. Thank you very, very much. Well, that's what I think. I want to hear from you, GBViews at GBNews.com. But Labour has only gone and blown the doors off. Those were the words of Sir Keir Starmer as he hailed this seismic victory in Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election. Labour's Michael Shanks took the seat with a 20.4% swing from the SNP. An election guru, Sir John Curtis, says these figures were replicated at a general election. It will be comparable to Labour's 1997 landslide under Tony Blair. If you are just joining us and for some reason you're wondering why we're so obsessed with a rather obscure seat somewhere, no offence to the fair people of Rutherglen and Hamilton West, no offence, it's because of the massive national connotations to this. So what it means for the SNP, what it means for Scottish nationalism, what it indicates potentially about the result and the landscape politically at the next general election. That's why we're so bothered. But meanwhile, Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, has conceded it was a disappointing night for the SNP. It was, of course, it's worth noting, a very disappointing night for the Scottish Conservatives as well, whose candidate lost his deposit after securing just 3.9% of the vote. I did have a Conservative former councillor on earlier on in the show who did quite a valiant effort at telling me that he thinks that many Conservatives in that area had deliberately voted for the Labour Party to stop the Scottish nationalists. I'm not sure I necessarily believed that. But let's get the thoughts now of data editor at The Spectator, Michael Simmons. Michael, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. First things first, is Scottish independence dead in the water?
I think for the immediate, even the medium future, Scottish independence is dead in the water. And that was probably guaranteed the day Nicola Sturgeon resigned. But I mean, further back, you could argue that the Brexit vote made Scottish independence dead in the water. But I think today just confirms that trajectory, that the losses we see the SNP making, the things going wrong for the party don't seem to be one-offs. It does now seem to be this downward trend.
Well, what do you think people really don't like about Humza Yousaf? Because he's not radically different politically from Nicola Sturgeon, is he?
No, he's very similar to Nicola Sturgeon, and he made himself out in the campaign to be the heir to Sturgeon. But I think as much as Sturgeon had many people who, really strongly disliked her, very critical of her, Sturgeon did have a huge following within middle Scotland, especially among women who really admired her leadership and whatever you can say about her policy. She clearly had electoral success. And I think Humza Yousaf just doesn't have that. As you've shown yourself earlier on, he can be gaffe-prone, he can be alienating. I think one example where Sturgeon was slightly smarter than him is Nicola Sturgeon would never get involved with one of the fiercest debates in Scotland, which was Celtic or Rangers. She just didn't want to touch that, didn't want to get involved with football. But Humza Yousaf does get involved in that and has got involved in things that have gone on between Celtic and Rangers. So I think he's less astute, and therefore people are more, against him for that.
He just seemed to have actually quite a bad track record, though, generally. I mean, there was an incident, I think, back in December 2016, that's certainly when it was reported, about him driving a friend's car without insurance whilst he was Transport Minister. That's a gaffe. I mean, that is just a gaffe, especially in light of the kind of things that Boris Johnson was made to go for. But then, there's a few other bits and bobs. He's been health minister, hasn't he? And, I mean, health in Scotland isn't great, is it? I mean, has he actually had anything that he's done in his life that would indicate that he would be a good leader of a party?
No, he's not really had any success. I mean, that's putting it kindly. He's just consistently failed as a minister. As you say, Transport Secretary, done for driving without insurance. Health Secretary, overseeing, some of the worst outcomes in the Scottish NHS's history. But also he was Justice Secretary and pushed through this really unpopular hate crime bill that still they're having problems implementing because it's just so hard for the police to deal with. So everything he has sort of done, he seemed to fail. And I think the only reason he ended up the heir to Sturgeon is because Kate Forbes basically fell out with the party over the trans issue, so she was out of the water. The original heir, Derek Mackay, who was the finance minister, his career is in tatters because he'd been texting a schoolboy. So kind of all the original heirs, further up the chain of succession have been finished off, and it was kind of just left with Humza.
Well, so it's one way to fall upwards, isn't it, really, that? But what's the general political mood like in Scotland at the moment, then? Because let's zoom out a bit now and talk about what this means for the general election, or could mean for the general election going forward, because I think that's got the broader appeal here. So Labour, a 20.4% swing. How likely do you think this is to take place, right across Scotland, really? Because, let's be honest, if Scotland goes red, as it were, then Keir Starmer wanders into Downing Street, probably.
Well, it's obviously difficult to extrapolate out from a by-election, but I do think that winning this by-election and winning it so handsomely was a necessary step for Keir Starmer's path to Downing Street. If he hadn't won this election, and if he had won it by a smaller margin, there would be more questions about will he do enough in Scotland. But I think it does now look from this result that in Scotland he probably will pick up a lot more seats, maybe even become the largest party, which of course is a huge help to get into Downing Street. And I think it's because there's this sort of pincer movement going on where there's SNP voters who don't really like the SNP, they just love independence. And they now think, well, independence isn't happening, so I'll go back to my natural home, which is Labour. But equally, there are many Tory voters who are not really that bothered about the Conservative Party. They just want the SNP out, and they'll pile in behind Labour as well. So Labour are the winners, SNP and Conservatives the losers.
Yeah, there's a real potent combination of factors taking place in Scotland that will have massive consequences, won't it? And again, for a lot of the people, there is an irony here. For a lot of the people that were desperate to have Scottish independence because they didn't think that they got enough from Westminster, it is actually Scotland that could well dictate who wanders into Downing Street, which is, of course, in Westminster. So, they do have a massive element to play in British politics as a whole. It's a hugely important area of British politics, isn't it? What goes on in Scotland. A word about the Conservatives. You mentioned them there. 3.9% of the vote in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. Didn't get his deposit back. It's a bad result. What do you make of that? Oh, have I got you, Michael? The Tories in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. Is it... bad for the Tories in Scotland?
Sound.
No, that's all right. We've lost Michael. Don't worry, we'll draw a line under it. Michael Simmons there, who is the data editor at The Spectator. Yep, OK, so loads still to come between now and the end of this hour. I'm going to be getting stuck into a new study that has found that trans women taking hormones can be up to 95% more likely to suffer heart disease. We'll be discussing that with the health editor at The Express, Lucy Johnson. But I also want to try and branch out a bit. Does that say anything about, kids going on this hormone-blocking treatment or puberty blockers or whatever it is that they go on? If stuff like this is happening, seriously, do we not need to be made more aware of this? 95% more likely to suffer heart disease if you're a trans woman taking hormones. I mean, that's an absolutely astonishing figure, isn't it? I'll be back in a sec. Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's just gone at 20 past 5. You're watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Now, a new study has found that trans women taking specialised hormonal drugs are almost twice as likely to suffer from cardiovascular disease as men. Basically, if you're a trans woman and you're on medication, apparently you're about 95% as likely to suffer heart disease, which is a shocking statistic and not one I imagine they tell you when you decide that you're going to do it. The study also revealed that transgender people, so regardless of background and sex, are significantly more at risk from deadly conditions like strokes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol levels when undergoing long-term drug schedules. Yeah, who would have seen this coming, eh? But more on this could be brought to us by Health and Social Affairs editor at the Sunday Express. It's Lucy Johnson. Lucy, thank you very much. Look, OK, the first things first. So if you're a trans woman and you're on a certain type of testosterone, right, you're 95% more likely to have heart disease, basically. So, yeah, it's pretty catastrophic, isn't it?
Yeah, so trans men, so men who are wanting to become women will be taking estrogen, and women who identify as men will be taking testosterone, and both those drugs carry risks, and this study shows they carry different risks. But there is evidence that both those drugs increase the clotting factors in the blood, and this may explain why there's an increased risk of heart disease and blood clots and strokes. But the data out there is very uncertain. So we've got this study here that's been put out recently, put out today, and then there are other studies which don't show the same effects. So this whole area is really uncertain, and there is huge debate over it, and it's very difficult to do long-term proper trials, because with proper clinical trials you need someone on the drugs and then you need a control group on a dummy drug, and that isn't possible to do. So there's a lot of debate and a lot of, but all drugs of course carry side effects, and there's been a huge increase in the number of people who are identifying as trans, both in children and adolescents and in adults.
Now there we go.
In the children, there's been more controversy because many doctors have said that definitely the risks appear to be outweighing the benefits, because we don't know the long-term effects.
Yeah. I mean, OK, I mean, we don't want to go down the vaccine rabbit hole too much, just mainly because I haven't got the energy today. But, you know, similar things about long-term data, etc., right? But when it comes to this, if we've got studies that appear to show, or could at least in any way indicate that if you, as a fully grown adult, so, you know, I have now, unfortunately, fully developed. And so if I then went on stuff, and then I am at least altering what is, you know, fixed in stone, as it were. But if you put children on things like puberty blockers, or you know, pump them full of different hormones, or that's before we've even got down to the actual surgical alterations that could be made for kids as well. You know, is there not a very real possibility that they are going to have some massive health consequences in the not-so-distant future?
I think, again, this is hotly debated, isn't it? And you get into trouble for saying both things. But the basic point is there isn't good long-term data on this. We haven't got long-term studies. We don't know what happens. There is a risk that there's permanent infertility in children. There is a risk that the bone health is affected, and that could have long-term implications for fractures. And there is a risk of clots and heart disease long term. So it's not routinely recommended anymore by the NHS. I know other countries have banned the use of these drugs in children, but at the moment it is being used on an experimental basis and being used, it's unregulated, so children can go, or people can go on the internet and get these drugs and just get hold of them and use them, and there are doctors that will prescribe them because they are allowed to be prescribed in some circumstances. So it's a really fiercely debated topic. For adults, again, the data is still not clear. We don't know the long-term harms, and some people say, well, it's not clear, you know, that there is a risk of increased heart disease and strokes, but that may be because these people are also more likely to be taking recreational drugs, and that may increase their risk. They're more likely to be stressed, and that may increase the risk. But the bottom line is there's no clear good evidence that transitioning reduces your risk of suicide or improves your mental health.
Now, this is another good thing, Lucy. This is another really good point there, because one of the big arguments in favour of allowing young children to transition or making it easier for adults to transition is that if you didn't do that, their mental health would suffer to the point of suicide. And we can't have that. We can't have people in a position where they were going to end their own life as a result of being so miserable about living in their own body. But what I think you appeared to suggest there was that there doesn't really appear to be any conclusive evidence that having transitioned, having gone through all of that, will make them less likely to end their own lives.
I think there are real problems with the few studies that have shown that it improves outcomes, and the follow-up isn't good, and there is systematic data that suggests quite the opposite. So given that there's no clarity in the data, given that we don't know, and given that there are some studies that show an increased risk of suicide and poorer mental health outcomes, whatever the debate you might have, then once we don't have that good data, then we should be really, really careful about what we're doing, and people need to know about the risks they're taking before they start taking these drugs.
Lucy, thank you very, very much. It's Lucy Johnson there, who is Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express. Look, I'm just going to finish off this particular segment by delving into the inbox, OK? So lots of reaction, again, as I was expecting, to this Labour Party policy, which, again, I just don't really understand what brain box has come up with this idea. But it appears to be that children should be supervised to brush their teeth in schools. And the thinking is that it would help cut back on dental waiting lists, we'd all have better oral hygiene, and that's fine. My argument against this is that, is the taxpayer going to be expected to pay for this? Because if you can't run your own home to the extent where you can't convince a small child to brush their own teeth, then I'm not paying for that. I'm not going to go out of my way to pay in the middle of an already incredibly high tax burden, the highest tax burden since the war, for us to go and start paying for parents who can't be bothered or won't make their children brush their own teeth. I think that's a disgrace, personally, as do a lot of you, actually. Patrick, I think that toothbrush companies should send them in for free if they're going to impose this. They used to. That's from Lee. Now, Lee, this is it. My main gripe with this is taxpayers' money. It is also just a fundamental laziness of parents. I mean, we already have calls for every single primary school pupil to go on free school meals. I mean, there are millionaires, by the way, who put their kids in state schools. They don't all go to private schools, so why should they get a free school meal? I do also just generally contest the idea that child hunger is to the level that it really is, where we need every single primary school to have a free school breakfast. I'm sorry, I just do not agree with that. How much does a slice of toast cost? How much does an apple cost? I think that we should be there for people, unquestionably, if they fall on hard times or if there's a massive problem in the home or in those emergency situations. But if you are, as a parent, my view would be, so helpless to the point where you cannot feed your child breakfast or make sure that they have basic hygiene, I really question whether or not you should be in a parental role. Quite a lot of emails coming in. A couple of people are saying, though, that, you know, when they were younger, it wasn't uncommon for them to brush their teeth at school. Parents rushing to get into work just dump their kids at school, says Ian. Imagine if you went into work and told your employer to give you a breakfast and brush your teeth in working hours, you would be sacked. You would, Ian. I mean, the other devastating consequence of this is we're falling behind in the league tables when it comes to education. Shouldn't teachers be teaching kids maths, English, languages, a bit of science, all of that stuff, as opposed to standing over a small child and checking that they'd brush their teeth? I just see that as being a complete and utter irrelevance. When I went to school, we had a school dentist who looked at our teeth regularly. This, of course, was not long after the war. I was born in 1946, and then I went to school at the age of 5. The problem is now there are just so many of us. Thousands and thousands more children, and the NHS can't keep up. That's what happens when you're overpopulated, and that is from Nina. Thank you very much, everybody who's been getting in touch. gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, as the numbers of migrants in hotels is on the rise around the UK, it can't be surprising that protests are also increasing. And one hotel protest that we've been following incredibly closely on this show is in Wales, and it's found itself embroiled in another storm. We'll be looking at that very, very shortly. But first, it's your headlines with Tatiana.
Patrick, thank you and good afternoon. This is the latest. A man has been remanded in custody over an alleged plot to kidnap and kill TV presenter Holly Willoughby. Gavin Plum, a shopping centre security guard, is charged with soliciting a man to carry out the crimes. The star pulled out of hosting ITVs this morning after bosses were reportedly alerted to the possible threat. It's understood she's been given round-the-clock security and support. Labour is describing its Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election win as a seismic victory. Michael Shanks took the seat with 58% of the vote, more than double that of the SNP's Katie Loudon. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says Scotland is key to securing a majority at the next general election. And a Conservative councillor has called for the Home Secretary's resignation over the handling of RAF Scampton. The government is accused of ignoring a legal order to stop converting the former airbase into a migrant camp. The Home Office says it's confident the project meets planning requirements, but Councillor Roger Patterson labelled the department liars. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2239 and €1.1566. The price of gold, £1,496.55 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 closed at 7,494 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Now, as the number of migrants staying in hotels across the country continues to rise, the protests against them are also becoming more and more frequent. Stradey Park Hotel in Llanelli, Wales, was the site of the latest incident that saw police rush to the scene as the protesters began to storm the grounds of the site, apparently. Joining us now is the host and commentator from the Twitch channel Voice of Wales and regular on this show as well. It's Dan Morgan. Dan, thank you very much. Great to see you again. So what is the latest on this particular hotel? I understand it's kicked off again a bit, has it?
Yeah, so the latest is that the fire department have gone in now and they have deemed it unsafe. It doesn't meet any fire regulations. It's not safe for escaping. The fire detection isn't available. So at the moment, there's a notice on there that nobody can sleep in the building due to the state that it's in. That's the latest where we are. So that's a very big sort of win for the protesters. Now, the land that we're seeing there, that's actually contested land. So in the court injunction, that access way was for the hotel, but it was also for the landowners. Now, on Sunday just gone, there was a massive motorcade that did a drive past of the hotel to show its support. That consisted of members of the public, local businesses. You had the bikers were there, the farmers were there, and their tractors and quads. And it was a massive display of unity, I suppose. But the bikers decided to exercise their rights to go into the contested land, which the police did try to prevent happening. Now, it's a trespass, which is a civil matter, so there's questions whether or not the police should have prevented it, and with the court injunction as well, giving access, should they have really got involved? Should they have just let the bikes go in and do what they wanted to do? But they chose to try and prevent, as you can see here, and what happened is the public just got involved, and they made the police, basically move out the way to allow the bikes in, and that shows.
So we do have a situation where this is a hotel that employed 90-odd people, I think it was. They were all turfed out, obviously. It was a big draw for the local area. I think it's the only major hotel like that, that was there. That was then due to house all male asylum seekers, I believe, and. Hundreds of people now. I mean, this has been going on. People have been camping outside this hotel to try to stop this 24/7 now for months, haven't they?
Yeah, literally since May. Since the news broke, the camp has formed. It's grown and grown and grown. Where the original camp was, behind that now there's another tent that's been donated, which is a big military-style tent, and then that is beyond the wall, so it's on the land that is contested. So the protesters. They are, everyone knew that they were setting that camp. The police were hoping that when the weather changes, the people will tend to fizzle off. But what we're seeing with how the police are acting and the amount of arrests that are happening, and it does seem very two-tiered sort of policing that we're seeing at the moment, it's just attracting more and more protesters. I know there's Halloween parties arranged, there's Christmas lunch already being arranged to have it inside the camp. So it's having the opposite effect of what these politicians and police are trying to give, because they are hoping that they can push the protesters away and they can calm it down a little bit. But at the moment, the night of the motorcade, there was 60 police officers on a head count on the ground in front of the hotel and more surrounding the perimeter. So it's costing.
And there's no one in there, though, is there? This is what I don't quite understand. I mean, I get that it's owned by somebody, a hotel, so it's property, and the police would have a duty for that property not to be trashed. I would counter that slightly by saying that they have already trashed it, haven't they? As in, the people that they were ripping it out to try to make it ready for these new migrant arrivals. And so it's not actually fit for human habitation at the moment anyway, is it?
No, it's absolutely not. And that's what the fire department said when they went there, the fire service, they've been round the building, they've put the notices up, and even the security, who are there 24 hours, they do different shifts. They have a changeover in the morning and in the afternoon. The security are now no longer allowed to sleep at the premises, which is what they have been doing for some time. There's been 5, I believe, security firms. The quickest one, they went in, they decided this isn't for them, and they came out. So, you know, it's getting to the point now where, you know, the question's got to be asked, is this feasible? The review, a 90-day review, is due to take place next week, we believe, and that would be between the Home Office, the owners of the hotel, potentially the police, politicians and fire department as well. So we just got to see where that goes.
But I think I'm right in saying, I mean, it must be. I cover the issue of migrant hotels a lot. I think this must be the longest and largest protest anywhere in the UK, I think, at a migrant hotel. Why do the people there care so much about this? Why?
Well, what you've got in Llanelli is that you've still got community. The Welsh Labour government have done everything they can to destroy the community in big cities, you know, Swansea, Cardiff, Wrexham, Newport, all these places have gone, the community spirit's gone. Llanelli, it's got a very long history of community spirit and people, when they don't like government policy, stepping up and saying no. And every time you've got the Rebecca riots, for example, happened, you know, a very long time ago. That was in regards to farmers getting into the town centre to sell their goods. They wanted to impose taxes on that and toll gates. That was prevented through mass civil protest. And then you've got the railway strikes that happened as well. So there's a long history of this in Llanelli, and they are absolutely the type of community that I believe the Welsh government fear, because they aren't afraid to stand up and say no. They aren't afraid to get arrested if it comes to it, to make their point and make their voice heard, which is what we've seen now. I think it's up to like 26 arrests now so far. So, you know, they are going the distance. And the difference is that each of them people there will willingly and happily go and get arrested for the next person, the person next to them. The saying was said the other day, you know, one of them gets kicked, the whole community limp. And that's exactly the feeling that we get from...
And it's growing and growing, and it's a monumental waste of police time and resources to have 60 police officers surrounding a hotel that possibly should never... Well, definitely should never have been used in the first place for this stuff. And, you know, they could be doing better things. The best thing to do would just be to say, look, we're not... Why are we continuing to do this? Months and months and months. Just call it off. And if there is such big opposition as well, I mean, I would argue at what point are the British public going to be consulted about any of this? And if they're not going to be consulted about any of it and they decide to set up a camp for the best part of 6 months and that camp's getting larger and larger and you're talking about having Christmas dinner there and all sorts, just move on. Find another hotel. Find somewhere else or do something else. Why continue to just hammer this community that obviously do not want it, you know? But, Dan, thank you very much. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
We're out of time because I was ranting on there, but it's Dan Morgan, there's the voice of Wales, good lad. Yeah, look, again, he makes a great point about community, doesn't he? And I can't help but wonder whether or not, in a lot of parts of the UK, you know, the solidified community, whether it's a village or a town, has been broken down over the years, hasn't it? Certainly in cities, and therefore maybe that makes it a little bit easier for people to implement things that you don't particularly like. Get in touch, though, on that story, gbviews@gbnews.com. We'll keep checking in there with the Shreddy Park Hotel. I think it's a really interesting microcosm of where Britain is when it comes to the asylum seeker hotels. But still to come, police in Scotland have cancelled plans to take on 200 new recruits in January. They scramble to save some cash. Plus, my pick of the day, will Saudi Arabia allow beer at the 2034 World Cup? They're saying that they will, but we had something similar in Qatar, didn't we? And they backed out at the last minute. Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio, and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 6:15. You're watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. And as if things couldn't get much worse for Humza Yousaf after his by-election loss, he now has to account for a huge overspend in the police force. So Police Scotland has cancelled plans to take on 200 new recruits in January, despite growing concerns over the increased demand for them in urban centres. Police Scotland are currently facing a huge £19 million projected overspend this year. But can the country afford to lose these new recruits? Joining me now is the former head of counter-terrorism at the City of London Police. It's Kevin Hurley. Kevin, thank you very much. So has law and order gone to the dogs in Scotland, then?
Well, it hasn't gone to the dogs, but unfortunately, we're going to see 200 less police officers on the street because the budget doesn't add up. I mean, the things that concern me really about this are it's more than just 200 young officers not going to be recruited in at this moment. They're also closing down training for a few months to save money. And that's a thin end of the wedge because a police service or police force still needs to be able to maintain the quality of service that it delivers, such as it is these days. And if you stop delivering training across the board to detectives, these traffic officers like this one we're watching, investigating accidents and so on, you just see a drop-off in the standard of service. But we are where we are. I'm afraid the country is skint and there's not the money, certainly in Scotland, for them to...
I'll be honest with you, I'm surprised that they actually can had the applications to be a police officer these days, because you're not allowed to strike. You aren't massively well paid, I think, for the job that you do. If there was one sector within our public sector that I would give a pay rise to, it'd be the police, straight away. You know, as a Conservative Party conference in Manchester, you see them stood out there all day in the driving rain. Some of them are armed, and you think if one of them does end up using that gun on somebody who may or may not actually be a violent thug or a terrorist, there's every chance that they find themselves in court and completely thrown under the bus by the higher-ups. I just think it doesn't seem to be a great time to be a police officer. Everything you say or do is on body cam. You've got people running around with knives and machetes. I just think, you know, I was amazed, to be honest with you, Kevin, they managed to recruit anybody to begin with.
Well, I mean, I agree. The thing is, for a young person, it sounds like a very interesting, exciting, varied job, which it is. But as you start to learn what's going on and the constraints that are upon you, of course, more and more people are actually voting with their feet and leaving. My own son, with 16 years in, very good job, detective sergeant on the anti-terrorist squad, walked out the door last year to the public sector. He's the 9th member of my family to have been in the police. And emotionally, that was quite traumatic to deal with the fact that he's gone. But it's the right decision, because the quality of life for police officers in terms of their fear about job security, their fear to use force, as you've just described it, has dropped right off. And as you say, we're very quick as a society to throw them under the bus. Virtually all forms of the media, with the exception of GB News, are on their case just for a cheap headline, and very few people do what you do.
I think yeah, thank you. I do think that there seems to be the presumption of guilt when it comes to the police. I don't know whether that's like a natural human instinct to push back against authority or whatever, but you know, people, in my view, people just don't think it through. This idea of perpetuating that things like stop and search is an inherently racist activity that has to be stopped because police officers deliberately go out and look for people of ethnic minority appearance to search them. You know, I think, well, what's the alternative then? We have no stop and search, do we? We have no, well, that doesn't exist. You know, defund the police, giving platforms to people who want to defund the police. OK, fine. Well, have you seen what goes on in parts of America where, you know, there's just total lawlessness as a result of some of these idiots being given the reins of power?
Yeah, I mean, you would think the police are an abject failure the way it's reported upon, but we need to remember one thing. The prisons are full. We're actually thinking about sending prisoners abroad to house them. And it wasn't the RSPCA who put them there. It was the police. And even with our faltering court system, which is struggling, the police are still delivering. But you are correct. You know, and just let me address that point on stop and search. Young black youths are probably 6 to 8 times more likely to be stopped and searched in London, but they're 30 times more likely to be stabbed to death, predominantly by young black youths. The police are not foolish. They're actually quite well educated, most of them, and they do use their intelligence, and they are intelligence-led in what they do, and the intelligence tells them it's mainly black kids who are killing black kids. It's no surprise. Well, you can read the news every time we look at the victims on your show in the newspaper, they're black kids.
Look, exactly. And this is the thing. Look, Kevin, thank you very much. Kevin Hurley there, former head of counter-terrorism at the City of London Police. Now, I just wanted to finish with Patrick's pick of the day, which is, I think, an unusual story. It's where I just find something that I think you might have missed, OK? So sources have claimed that football fans are to be allowed, definitely, to drink alcohol if Saudi Arabia wins their bid to host the World Cup in 2034. And if there's one country you can trust to keep to their word, it will be Saudi Arabia, OK? The consumption and sale of alcohol is against the law in the Muslim-majority country, but this could mean allowing booze to be sold in hotels and restricted fan zones. OK, I mean, just a few points on this. When the Qatar World Cup was very controversially awarded to Qatar, they ended up saying right at the last minute, didn't they, that there was going to be increased restrictions on where booze could be. I think I'm right in saying that there was a massive problem with Budweiser, who were the one of the tournament's major sponsors there. You know, I don't really think, though, that the idea of booze being allowed on the streets of Saudi Arabia is the biggest issue about awarding another World Cup, potentially, to a country where, you know, if you're gay, probably pretty legitimate to throw you off a building or stone you to death. You know, the human rights cesspit that is Saudi Arabia, the use of slaves, the massive geopolitical concerns that take place over there. I mean, are we seriously considering launching a new World Cup in 2034 in Saudi Arabia? I find it very, very concerning. The problem with it, though, is that we've had footballers, haven't we, like Jordan Henderson. You know, put a rainbow armband on, won't he? He'll come out, I'm an ally for this, I'm an ally for that. And then, you know, when the person comes calling with the big cheque and it's towards the end of your career and you think that, oh, maybe I haven't already made enough millions after a glittering career in the Premier League and the Champions League and right at the thick end and loads of money in the bank. No, I haven't got quite enough there. I'm going to go to Saudi Arabia, I'm going to cash it in. And what they do is sports wash countries with abominable human rights records that should be nowhere near the international stage when it comes to these projects. They shouldn't be allowed, I don't think, really, to actually go and promote themselves. But if they are going to do that, if you're going to have football players who are doing that, then maybe we all just need to shut up about human rights being an issue in sports. You can't really have it both ways. You can't take the knee and then go and play in a country where, you know, there's injustice everywhere, etc. Either take the knee and don't go, or don't take the knee and then shut up about it all. But I'm just going to finish by delving into the world of my inbox, gbviews@gbnews.com. A lot of reaction to that report that we did there, an update for you from that Welsh migrant hotel in Llanelli. Jean's been on. What people are most angry about is that right next door to the hotel is a park where children play. And if a lot of these young men come, then they fear that women and children will not be safe. How many times, Jean, do we see this? Whether it's a nursery school, whether it's a park, or whether it's an old people's home, it always seems like there are vulnerable people right next to these sites who are completely forgotten about. You would not want it, would you? If you had your elderly relative in a care home and they were very vulnerable, and then all of a sudden it emerged that there were going to be 500 young men plonked in a building right next to that care home with no barriers or walls really stopping them from doing whatever, you wouldn't be happy about that, would you? The people who make these decisions wouldn't be happy about it, so why should other people have to suffer? Loads of other views coming your way. Just want to give you a little heads up there before I hand over to the wonderful Michelle Dewberry, who will be on for the next hour. I will be back this evening, 8 till 9 p.m, and look, as everybody knows, there's been a lot going on at GB News recently, hasn't there? So I'm just filling in for a Friday night show, which is just going to be, hopefully, a great laugh. I've got a great panel. We're going to take a sideways look at the news. We're going to do local news stories. There's always great local news stories. We're going to be doing the spin room, where we get a good news story and you have to make it bad. A bad news story, you have to make it good. We're going to have a big debate at the top, and we're going to play a few little news quizzes. So if you want a laugh this evening and a bit of life relief from a heavy week, then make sure you tune in to GB News 8 till 9 p.m. You know, it's Friday night after all. We might as well have a smile on our face. But thank you very much, everybody, for a wonderful week. I will see you all at 8 p.m. Up next is Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. Like I said, I'll see you in a tick. Take it easy.
Hello there, good evening. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. This weekend is going to be one of contrast across the UK. High pressure is in charge across the south, importing heat from North Africa and Iberia, really turning very warm for the time of year. But this trailing frontal system across Scotland is going to be providing much wetter conditions. It will eventually clear off parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England throughout this evening, and then stall across central western areas of Scotland repeatedly. Heavy rain overnight. Elsewhere, generally staying largely dry, some clear spells in there, but most of us seeing relatively mild conditions to start Saturday morning around 14 degrees Celsius. This rain then will be heavy and persistent throughout Saturday, and there is an amber weather warning in force. The potential for flooding and disruption is expected, and there could even be some landslides where we see totals really totting up 180 millimetres in some spots.